Let the weak perish, that the strong may thrive. The Arcturian elder's decree echoed through the sterile chamber. Dr. Jeremy Jackson clenched his fist, the oath he swore a lifetime ago burning in his heart. First, do no harm. He watched as rows of Arcturian patients were wheeled past, their multi-jointed limbs twitching under the harsh glare of the overhead lights. The air hummed with the low thrum of unseen machinery, a constant reminder of the facility's cold efficiency. Arcturian medics, tall and slender with skin like polished obsidian, moved with detached precision, their faces betraying no emotion. Each patient was scanned, assessed, and then marked. Those deemed strong received a vibrant green symbol on their foreheads, a promise of treatment. Those deemed weak were branded with a crimson sigil, a death sentence disguised as triage. The sigil burned in Jeremy's mind, a stark reminder of another mark, another failure. A young woman, barely more than a girl, lay gasping in a hospital bed. Her skin was pale, her breath shallow. Jeremy, fresh out of medical school, worked frantically, pumping her chest, trying to force air into her failing lungs. "Come on, stay with me," he pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. But it was no use. Her eyes fluttered closed and the monitor flatlined. The memory clung to him, a constant ache in his chest. He had been so young, so inexperienced. If only he had known more, done more. The memory faded, replaced by the cold reality of the Arcturian medical facility. He had been assigned to this gleaming spire of technology, a structure that dwarfed anything humanity had ever conceived. Its corridors were lined with shimmering panels and pulsating energy conduits, a testament to Arcturian ingenuity. Yet, beneath the surface of technological marvel lay an ethical abyss. The air was filtered, antiseptic, devoid of any human warmth. Every surface gleamed, reflecting the cold, calculating logic that permeated the facility. It was a place of miracles, capable of mending bones in seconds and eradicating diseases before they took hold. But those miracles were reserved only for the strong. Jeremy watched as an Arcturian doctor, his face impassive, examined an infant with a visible genetic defect, a malformed limb, a weakened respiratory system. Without a word, the doctor turned away, signaling a nearby attendant. "Resource allocation protocols," he stated, his voice devoid of empathy. "The infant is not viable." The attendant moved to take the child, but Jeremy stepped forward, blocking his path. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice rising in protest. The doctor turned to him, his obsidian eyes narrowing. "Dr. Jackson, I understand that human medical practices differ from our own. However, you are a guest in our facility and must abide by our protocols." Ignoring the warning, Jeremy reached for the infant, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. He checked the baby's vitals, his mind racing. "The child is weak but not beyond saving," he argued, his voice tight with urgency. "With proper care, we can stabilize him." Before he could begin treatment, a towering figure emerged from the shadows. The head elder, his face etched with ancient wisdom and unwavering grit, approached them. His presence radiated power, silencing the room. "Dr. Jackson," the elder stated, his voice resonating with authority, "your compassion is admirable but misguided. This facility operates under a strict mandate to preserve the strength and vitality of our species. Weakness in any form is a threat to our survival and must be eliminated." Jeremy met the elder's gaze, his own filled with defiance. "But every individual has potential," he countered. "Every life is worth saving." "Sentimentality is a luxury we cannot afford," the elder replied, his voice unwavering. "Our resources are finite. We must allocate them wisely, ensuring the survival of the strongest." The elder paused, his gaze piercing. "Your presence here, Dr. Jackson, is not merely an act of altruism on our part. It is an experiment. We wish to see if humans, with your unique ethical code, can adapt to our ways. Can you learn to prioritize the needs of the many over the desires of the few? Can you embrace the logic of survival, even when it demands difficult choices? Jeremy stared at the elder, the weight of his words settling upon him. He was not here to save lives. He was here to be tested, to be molded into something he was not. The elder gestured towards a nearby door. We have identified a new cohort of weak Arcturians. Your task is to evaluate them, Dr. Jackson. Determine which, if any, are worthy of treatment. Prove to us that your compassion is not simply blind sentimentality, but a force that can benefit our species. Jeremy hesitated, his heart pounding. He had come here to heal, to save lives. But now he was being asked to judge, to decide who lived and who died. As he turned to follow the elder, a flicker of movement caught his eye. In a darkened corner of the triage area, a young Arcturian was kneeling beside his brother, his face etched with despair. He held a small device in his hand, its purpose chillingly clear. Jeremy rushed towards them, his heart pounding in his chest. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice filled with alarm. The young Arcturian looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and resignation. "I am sparing him the pain," he whispered. "He is weak. He will never have a place in this world." Jeremy grabbed the device, tossing it aside. "No," he shouted. "Don't do this. There is always hope." "Hope?" the young Arcturian scoffed. "There is no hope for him. He is a burden, a drain on our resources." The disabled brother looked up at Jeremy, his eyes wide with fear. "I can save him," Jeremy insisted, his voice pleading. "I can help him, but I need resources. I need your help." The head elder stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Very well, Dr. Jackson," he said, his voice cold and measured. "I will provide you with the resources you require. But know this, if you fail to follow our rules, if you waste our resources on a lost cause, both you and the boy will face the consequences." Jeremy adjusted the archaic Arcturian respirator, its hissing a poor substitute for the sleek machines he knew back on Earth. The Arcturian nurses, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming under the dim light of the ward, watched him with thinly veiled skepticism. Their multifaceted eyes, usually so expressive, were shuttered, unreadable. He could feel their doubt like a chill in the air. Krell, the Arcturian boy, lay motionless beneath a shimmering, translucent membrane. His chest rose and fell weakly, his lavender skin almost gray. Jeremy pressed a stethoscope-like device to Krell's chest, the amplified sounds of his failing heart echoing in his ears. The boy's condition was far more complex than the initial reports indicated. There was a structural anomaly in his respiratory system, a narrowing of the airways that required specialized pressure regulation. "Equipment unavailable here. I need a barometric regulator type 7, Jeremy said, turning to the lead nurse, a stern-looking Arcturian named Lyra, and a neural dampener. His brain activity is spiking erratically." Lyra tilted her head, her antennae twitching. "Those are specialized. Such equipment is reserved for higher priority cases." Jeremy pursed his lips. Resource scarcity. That was the euphemism for letting the weak die. This boy needs it now. Every moment counts. Lyra remained impassive. "I will file the request with the council." Jeremy knew what that meant. The request would disappear into the bureaucratic void and Krell would suffocate. He couldn't let that happen. He rummaged through his medical kit, pulling out a human nebulizer and a makeshift oxygen concentrator he'd cobbled together from spare parts. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. He adjusted the settings, trying to compensate for Krell's alien physiology. The boy coughed, a weak, rattling sound. It wasn't enough. He ran a diagnostic scan, the results flashing across his visor. Krell's genetic defect wasn't just physical. It affected his cognitive abilities as well. There were signs of severe mental instability, erratic neural firings that threatened to overwhelm his fragile brain. A wave of nausea washed over Jeremy, a familiar dread creeping into his heart. He remembered another boy, years ago, back on Earth. Another genetic anomaly, another desperate attempt to improvise with limited resources. Another failure. The image of the boy's lifeless eyes flashed before him, a constant reminder of his own limitations. He was in the sterile white room, the rhythmic beeping of the monitors a mocking soundtrack to his failure. The boy's mother, her face etched with grief, stared at him with accusing eyes. "You promised you could save him," she whispered, her voice permeated with bitterness. "You promised." Jeremy shook his head, banishing the memory. He wouldn't fail again, he couldn't. A soft voice broke through his concentration. "You are troubled." He turned to see a young Arcturian female standing hesitantly in the doorway. She was smaller than the other nurses, her exoskeleton dull and uneven. A pronounced limp marred her gait, and her antennae drooped at an unnatural angle. Ostracized, he recognized the sick doctor. "I'm Dr. Jackson," he said, extending a hand. She hesitated for a moment, then grasped his hand with surprising strength. "I am Astra. I have been observing you." "Observing?" "I know Krell," she said softly, her multifaceted eyes filled with a strange mixture of sadness and persistence. "His condition is complicated. The elders will not approve of your efforts." "I don't care about the elders," Jeremy said, his voice hardening. "I care about saving this boy's life." Astra nodded, her antennae twitching. "I can help you. I know things. About Krell, about our people. That you do not." Over the next few hours, Astra became his shadow, a silent observer and a subtle guide. She pointed out nuances in Krell's physiology that he had missed, suggesting alternative treatment protocols based on ancient Arcturian remedies. She explained that Krell's mental instability stemmed from his isolation, his lack of social interaction. The weak, as they were called, were often shunned, denied the companionship and support that were essential for their well-being. Jeremy tried to engage Krell in therapeutic activities, reading him stories from his datapad, playing him music from Earth. But Krell remained unresponsive, his eyes vacant, his body tense. Every touch seemed to agitate him further. The elders, led by the imposing figure of Elder Vorlag, observed Jeremy's unconventional methods from a viewing platform above the ward. Their expressions were inscrutable, a mixture of disapproval and morbid curiosity. They allowed him to continue, but Jeremy could feel their judgment like a weight on his shoulders. He was an experiment, a test of human compassion against Arcturian pragmatism. "There is a place," Astra whispered one evening, her voice barely audible above the hum of the medical equipment. "A place where the different find solace." "What place?" Jeremy asked, his curiosity piqued. "A hidden community," Astra said, her eyes darting nervously. "A place where the weak support each other, share knowledge, and survive." That night, under the cover of darkness, Astra led Jeremy through a labyrinthine network of tunnels beneath the city. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and strange, unfamiliar fungi. Finally, they reached a hidden chamber, illuminated by bioluminescent moss. Inside, a group of Arcturians, each bearing some visible physical defect, huddled together, sharing stories and laughter. They were wary of Jeremy at first, their multifaceted eyes filled with suspicion. But Astra spoke for him, vouching for his compassion and his willingness to help. Jeremy witnessed their resilience, their ingenuity, their unwavering spirit in the face of adversity. They had created their own society, their own culture, a testament to the power of human, or Arcturian, connection. But they were afraid to let Krell join them. He was too unstable, too unpredictable. His presence, they feared, would jeopardize their fragile sanctuary. Back in the ward, Krell's condition deteriorated rapidly. His breathing became labored, his skin turned a sickly shade of purple. Astra ran a diagnostic, her antennae drooping with despair. "He needs Xylosian nutrient," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It is rare, found only in the royal gardens. Without it, he will not survive the night." Jeremy knew what Xylosian nutrient was. It was a potent enzyme that regulated cellular respiration, essential for Arcturians with Krell's specific genetic defect. But it was also a highly prized commodity, reserved for the elite. He approached Elder Vorlag, pleading for access to the nutrient. He explained Krell's condition, his desperate need, but Vorlag remained unmoved. "The nutrient is a precious resource," he said, his voice cold and implacable. "It cannot be wasted on one who is already failing." Jeremy felt a surge of anger, a white-hot fury that threatened to consume him. "He's a child," he shouted, his voice echoing through the ward. "He deserves a chance to live." Vorlag remained impassive. "Sentiment is a luxury we cannot afford. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few." Jeremy stared at Vorlag, his heart pounding in his chest. He was faced with a moral dilemma, a choice that would define him. He could abide by the Elders' rules, accept their cold pragmatism, and watch Krell die. Or he could defy them, steal the nutrient, and risk everything. He turned to Astra, his eyes filled with desperation. "There has to be a way," he said, his voice pleading. Astra looked at him, her multifaceted eyes filled with a strange mixture of fear and tenacity. "There is," she whispered, "but it is dangerous." Under the cloak of the Arcturian night, Jeremy and Astra formulated their plan. It was audacious, reckless, and fraught with peril, but it was their only hope. Astra, using her knowledge of the facility's security systems, would create a diversion, drawing the guards away from the royal gardens. Jeremy, using his human agility and his understanding of Arcturian technology, would infiltrate the gardens and steal the Zalosian nutrient. The plan worked, at first. Astra's diversion was a brilliant success, creating chaos and confusion throughout the facility. Jeremy slipped into the royal gardens, navigating the labyrinthine pathways with practiced ease. He found the Zalosian nutrient, a vial of shimmering, iridescent fluid nestled within a protective case. He grabbed it, his heart pounding in his chest, but as he turned to leave, he heard a voice behind him. "I thought you might try something like this, human." He turned to see Elder Vorlag standing in the doorway, his multifaceted eyes gleaming with cold satisfaction. Two guards flanked him, their weapons drawn. The cold metal of the energy rifle pressed against Jeremy's temple. His lungs burned, each gasp of the thin Arcturian air a painful reminder of his failed escape. The guards, their chitinous armor gleaming under the harsh twin suns, dragged him back toward the city center. The tribunal was held in a vast, echoing chamber, the walls lined with intricate carvings depicting Arcturian history. The elders, their faces etched with centuries of harsh decisions, sat on a raised dais, their eyes like chips of obsidian. The air crackled with unspoken judgment. "Jeremy Jackson," the lead elder's voice resonated, amplified by the chamber's acoustics. "You stand accused of violating Arcturian law, of endangering the very fabric of our society by stealing vital nutrients reserved for the strong." Astra stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "Elders, I implore you to reconsider." Jeremy acted out of compassion, a desire to save a life. He saw Krell's suffering and did what any being with empathy would do. "Empathy is a luxury we cannot afford," another elder snapped, his mandibles clicking. "Sentimentality weakens us. We are forged in the crucible of survival, and only the strong endure." A ripple of agreement spread through the chamber. Flashback, a barren landscape choked with dust. Gaunt Arcturians, their eyes hollow with hunger, scavenged for scraps. A desperate choice: sacrifice the weak to save the strong. The memory passed down through generations was etched into their very DNA. The lead elder turned back to Jeremy. "Your actions are a direct challenge to our way of life. Therefore, we sentence you to exile. You are forbidden from practicing medicine on Arcturus. You will be deported immediately." Astra rushed to Jeremy's side, her hand reaching for his. "Jeremy, please, you must go. They'll do worse than exile if you stay." Her voice was a desperate whisper, permeated with fear. Jeremy looked into her pleading eyes, seeing the genuine terror reflected there. But then he thought of Krell, lying helpless, and the others, the countless weak Arcturians who were being left to die. He couldn't abandon them. "I can't, Astra," he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "I swore an oath. I won't leave them to die." The guards seized him, stripping him of his medical credentials and his meager supplies. They left him standing on the edge of the city with nothing but the clothes on his back. Astra found him a few hours later, her eyes red-rimmed. "There's a place," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A hidden community where others like us have sought refuge." She led him through a maze of narrow alleyways and forgotten tunnels, until they reached a hidden entrance concealed behind a crumbling wall. Inside, a network of interconnected chambers buzzed with activity. Arcturians with missing limbs, genetic defects, and chronic illnesses moved about, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and fear. "They oppose the Elders' policies," Astra explained. "They're willing to help you." The community welcomed Jeremy with open arms, offering him food, shelter, and a place to work. Using salvaged materials and his own ingenuity, Jeremy began to create makeshift medical equipment: a dialysis machine cobbled together from spare parts, a respirator powered by a modified air purifier. The community watched in awe as he worked, marveling at his resourcefulness and his unwavering dedication. Krell's condition stabilized thanks to the stolen nutrient, but his mind remained fractured, plagued by nightmares and fits of rage. He was a constant reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. One day, while exploring the hidden community, Jeremy stumbled upon a hidden laboratory filled with advanced medical technology that had been abandoned long ago. "This could cure Krell," Astra said, her eyes wide with hope. "But it requires a rare energy source, one that's only accessible through the Citadel." The Citadel, the heart of the Elders' power, a heavily guarded fortress, impossible to infiltrate. Just then, a new, more moderate Elder secretly approached Astra. His name was Valerius, and he seemed genuinely concerned. "Astra, I admire your compassion and that of the human doctor. I can offer you limited resources and monitoring in exchange for ceasing these unnatural practices. Think of it, Astra, medicine for those you can help in a practical way." Astra's eyes darted to Jeremy and then back to Valerius. It was a deal that could save many lives, but at what cost? I don't know," Astra admitted, her voice tight. "I once tried to join the Arcturian Guard," Astra revealed to Jeremy later that evening, a haunted look in her eyes. "I thought I could change things from the inside, but they rejected me, of course, said I was too weak." Jeremy clenched his fist. He couldn't accept Valerius's compromise. He had to find a way to get the energy source. He had to save Krell. "We're going to the Citadel," Jeremy declared, his voice filled with determination. "We're going to get that energy source." Astra stared at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and admiration. With the help of the hidden community, Jeremy and Astra began to plan their mission, devising a strategy that exploited their unique skills and knowledge. They would use the Citadel's reliance on automated systems against them, exploiting a loophole in their security protocols. As they prepared to leave, a sudden alarm blared through the community. Their equipment, their carefully crafted plan, was in tatters. Someone had sabotaged them, alerting the Elders to their intentions. The transport shuddered, refusing to power up. Jeremy frowned, running a diagnostic scan on his wrist-mounted device. "That's not good. The energy coupling. Someone's deliberately overloaded it." Astra knelt beside him, her violet eyes narrowed. Sabotage, but who? The implication hung heavy in the air. This vehicle was essential to their mission. It was heavily shielded and fast, perfect for navigating the patrols. "We can't use the primary transport," Jeremy said grimly. "That leaves the secondary route, far more dangerous. Unstable terrain, more exposure, and it requires scaling the razor cliffs." A jarring image flashed in Jeremy's mind. Krell, his face contorted with suspicion, whispering to another member of the community, "He asks too many questions. Are you sure we can trust him?" The memory vanished as quickly as it came, leaving a residue of unease. Astra laid a hand on his arm. Perhaps we should reconsider the moderate elder's offer. He said he could provide the energy source with certain stipulations. Jeremy recoiled. Stipulations, like turning a blind eye to the elder's policies, like letting more people suffer. We didn't come all this way to compromise our principles, Astra. He remembered the face of the child he couldn't save years ago. The one that haunted his dreams, the one that drove him to be better. We can't back down now. But if we fail, Jeremy, we fail them all. The community will be exposed and countless others will suffer. The moderate elder's offer, while distasteful, might be the only way to ensure their survival. Jeremy stared at the sabotaged transport, then at Astra's worried face. We proceed as planned. We get that energy source ourselves, but if we fail, if we're compromised, we reconsider the offer. Agreed. Astra nodded slowly. Agreed. The Arcturian sun, a sickly green orb, cast long, distorted shadows as they began their trek on foot. The landscape was a jagged tapestry of obsidian peaks and toxic swamps. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of mineral deposits. Each step was a labored effort, the thin atmosphere burning in their lungs. After hours of grueling travel, they reached the edge of a ridge overlooking the energy source location, a heavily fortified mining facility carved into the side of a mountain. Power lines snaked across the landscape like metallic veins, feeding energy to the humming machinery within. Below, a patrol of Arcturian guards marched in rhythmic unison, their armored exoskeletons glinting in the dim light. The ground vibrated with each step. Jeremy pressed himself against the rock face, pulling Astra down beside him. The sound of their heavy breaths were the only thing he could hear. We need to know their route. We need to know their timing. Hours passed as they observed the guards. The patrol route was seemingly random, but Jeremy noticed a subtle pattern, a momentary lapse in surveillance near the facility's western perimeter, a blind spot created by the angle of the mountain and a malfunctioning sensor array. There, Jeremy whispered, pointing to the blind spot. They're relying on visual confirmation there. If we move quickly and quietly, we can slip past undetected. Astra nodded. The facility's security system. I remember some of the schematics from my training. There's a maintenance junction near the western perimeter. We can use it to override the primary power grid, disable the external sensors. Moving with practiced stealth, they descended from the ridge, their movements precise and coordinated. Astra used her knowledge of the local flora to mask their scent, while Jeremy used hand signals to communicate their movements. They reached the blind spot just as the patrol turned away. They slipped past the guards, their hearts pounding in their chests. The air crackled with anticipation as they approached the maintenance junction. Just as Astra began to interface with the system, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Krell, his eyes wide and unfocused, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. "You can't do this," he cried, his voice hoarse. "They're going to hurt you. I have to protect you." Before Jeremy could react, Krell lunged forward, grabbing Astra's arm. The system sparked, and a deafening alarm blared through the facility. Red lights flashed, and the ground vibrated as automated turrets swiveled into position. Jeremy and Astra were caught in the facility's security system, separated by blast doors that slammed shut with bone-jarring force. Astra found herself face to face with the lead guard, his helmeted visage impassive. "So the weak think they can steal from us," he sneered. "It was the moderate elder, wasn't it? He ordered the sabotage of your transport. He wanted you to fail." Meanwhile, Jeremy finally found the energy source, a glowing crystal pulsating with raw power, but as he reached for it, a familiar voice echoed through the chamber. "I won't let you destroy us, Jeremy." Krell stood between Jeremy and the crystal, a makeshift weapon fashioned from scrap metal clutched tightly in his trembling hands. His eyes were wild, his voice infused with madness. "You are one of them. You are going to take them away from us." Jeremy stared at Krell, his heart breaking. He could fight him, easily overpower him, but to do so, to harm Krell. "Krell, please," Jeremy pleaded, his voice trembling. "You don't understand, we're trying to help, this isn't you." Krell raised his weapon, his face a mask of desperation and fear. "I am protecting you from yourself." Jeremy had a choice to make. Fight Krell and secure the energy source, or try to reach him, to save him from the darkness that had consumed him. But if he didn't get that energy source, Astra and the rest of the weak would be doomed to suffer. Krell slumped against the cold, metallic wall, his multifaceted eyes blinking slowly. Jeremy kept the pressure on the Arcturian's pressure points, enough to keep him incapacitated but not enough to cause lasting harm. He looked to Astra, his own breath coming in ragged gasps. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice strained. Astra's mandibles clicked in agitation. "He'll be fine, just inconvenienced." Her gaze flicked towards the unconscious guard, then back to Jeremy. "But we have to go, now. Krell was a moderate, but he's still a guard. He still believes in the elders, even if he disagrees with some of their methods." She approached the lead guard, her small frame radiating an unexpected authority. "You know Elder Vorlag. You know he's being manipulated by the extremists on the council. They're using his idealism against him. He thinks he's helping, but he's only solidifying their power." Her voice was low, persuasive, tinged with a desperate urgency. The guard, his expression conflicted, shifted his weight from one foot to the other. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Finally, he lowered his weapon. "Go, before I change my mind. And if Vorlag is truly being misled, tell him what he's doing." He glanced nervously down the corridor. "I won't stop you, but I can't guarantee anyone else will be so understanding." Astra nodded sharply, grabbing Jeremy's arm. "Let's move." They hurried down the corridor, the rhythmic hum of the facility pressing in around them. "Vorlag didn't sabotage the mine's energy source," Astra hissed, her voice barely audible above the hum. "It was a trap set by his political rivals to discredit him." Jeremy frowned. "A trap? Why?" "Because Vorlag was close to discovering the geothermal vent, a clean, endless energy source that would make the mine and the elders' control over the weak obsolete." They reached a large, circular chamber. In the center, a series of thick pipes snaked into the floor, disappearing into the rock beneath. A faint heat radiated from the metal. "The vent," Astra confirmed, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "They're deliberately blocking it, restricting the flow, keeping the weak dependent on the energy they control." As they approached the blocked vent, the grinding sounds of tools against stone echoed nearby. They rounded a corner and saw a group of Arcturians, their bodies thin and frail, chipping away at the rock face with crude implements. Their movements were slow, labored, their multifaceted eyes dull with exhaustion. Jeremy's hand clenched into a fist. "We need to get them out of here." Astra grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Jeremy, no, they're monitored, constantly. Any act of rebellion, any sign of defiance, they'll be punished severely." But Jeremy was already moving forward. "We can't just leave them here." He approached the nearest worker, a young Arcturian female with a pronounced limp. "We're here to help. We know about the vent. We can free you." The worker recoiled, her eyes widening in fear. "No, you don't understand. They're always watching. Always listening." Her voice was a bare whisper. "Please, just go, save yourselves." Suddenly, a piercing alarm shrieked through the facility, bathing the chamber in a pulsating red light. "Too late," Astra breathed, pulling Jeremy back. "They know we're here." They turned and fled, the freed workers stumbling behind them, their movements hampered by years of neglect and malnutrition. Guards materialized from the shadows, their weapons raised, their faces grim. "This way," Astra shouted, leading them down a narrow, dimly lit passage. Jeremy, his mind racing, ripped a power cell from a nearby control panel. He quickly rewired it, connecting it to a discarded length of cable. "Astra, get them through the next doorway. I'll cover you." He tossed the makeshift device down the corridor, aiming for a junction box. A flash of light, A shower of sparks and the security system flickered, died, and was plunged into darkness. For a precious few seconds, the alarm ceased, and the guards hesitated. Astra, her voice tight with urgency, guided them through a series of twisting tunnels. These are old maintenance passages. They haven't been used in decades. The elders sealed them off, but they forgot about them. The tunnels were cramped and claustrophobic, the air thick with dust and the smell of decay. The walls were damp, slick with moisture. As they pressed deeper, the passage narrowed, leading to a collapsed section of the facility. Twisted metal, shattered rock, and broken pipes lay scattered across the floor, a testament to a long-forgotten disaster. Astra stopped, her expression grim. This is what happens when the elders prioritize strength over everything else. They neglect the infrastructure, they ignore the warnings. And this is the result. One of the freed workers, an elderly male, stumbled and fell, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He lay motionless on the cold, unforgiving floor. "He's weak," Astra said, her voice devoid of emotion. "He won't make it." Jeremy knelt beside the fallen worker, ignoring Astra's words. He felt for a pulse, his fingers searching for a sign of life. Faint, but there. He ripped a strip of cloth from his shirt and began to improvise, scavenging discarded tubing and connectors. "Jeremy, what are you doing? He's dying, we have to keep moving." Astra pleaded, her voice rising in desperation. "He's not dying if I can help it," Jeremy snapped, his focus absolute. He connected the tubing to a small air pump, creating a makeshift respirator. He pressed the mask to the worker's face, carefully adjusting the flow of air. The worker coughed, his eyes fluttering open. "We are being watched," he rasped, his voice weak. "They will not let us escape." As he finished, a series of heavy footsteps echoed through the tunnel. A harsh light pierced the darkness. "They're here," Astra breathed. As they emerged from the tunnel, they were met by a chilling sight. Elder Vorlag stood before them, his expression a mask of disappointment. Behind him, a squad of heavily armed guards stood at attention. I had truly hoped you would make a different choice," Vorlag said, his voice heavy with regret. "But you have proven yourselves to be unreliable." He paused, his multifaceted eyes fixed on Jeremy. "I believed your compassion might be a strength, human, but it is merely a weakness, a fatal flaw." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I was testing you to see if you would do the right thing, even when it put you in danger." Vorlag turned to his guards. "Stand down," he stated. His guards looked shocked, but obeyed his command. "I had to appear to be against you, to gain the trust of the other elders. I am going to help you," he said, his tone low and urgent. As he finished, a cacophony of grinding metal and screeching alarms filled the air. The tunnel entrance behind Vorlag was suddenly flooded with a blinding light as a swarm of armored figures poured into the chamber. The elders had arrived. The elder's hand shot out as if to offer a handshake, but the guards reacted faster. Two of them, hulking Arcturians with chitinous armor, seized his arms, their grip tightening with a sickening crack. Astra gasped, instinctively recoiling, and Jeremy moved to shield her, his own hand instinctively reaching for the discarded plasma pistol at his side. A low hum emanated from the guards' weapons as they leveled them at Jeremy and Astra. "Treason," one of them hissed, his multifaceted eyes narrowed with rage. "Stop," the moderate elder shouted, his voice strained. "This is a misunderstanding. Guards, stand down." He struggled against their grip, his face contorted in a grimace. Energy crackled in the air as plasma weapons charged, but before a shot could be fired, the moderate elder bellowed again, his voice echoing through the chamber. I was merely testing their loyalty. I remain true to the council. Release me." The guards hesitated, glancing at each other, confusion evident in their alien features. The other elders, their faces etched with suspicion, exchanged glances. One of them, a particularly gaunt Arcturian with eyes like chips of obsidian, spoke, his voice raspy. "Take him back to the council chambers. We will discuss this." The guards dragged the moderate elder away, his protests fading into the distance. As they were distracted, Jeremy grabbed Astra's hand. "Now," he hissed. Astra nodded, her eyes darting towards a seemingly blank section of the wall. She pressed a sequence of symbols, and a section of the wall slid open, revealing a dark, narrow passage. The freed workers, seeing their chance, surged towards the opening, their faces a mixture of fear and hope. "This way," Astra urged, pulling Jeremy along. They plunged into the darkness, the sounds of the council chamber fading behind them. The passage twisted and turned, leading them through the bowels of the facility. The air grew thick and heavy, filled with the cloying scent of geothermal vents and something else. Something metallic and faintly antiseptic. Finally, they emerged into a large cavern, lit by flickering bioluminescent fungi. Makeshift dwellings were carved into the walls, and a small group of Arcturians, their faces etched with hardship, looked up in surprise. This was the sanctuary. An Arcturian with a kind face and tired eyes stepped forward. She wore a simple tunic, stained with what looked like medicinal herbs. "Welcome," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I am Lyra. We have been expecting you." Lyra led them to a small chamber where she explained the elders' plan in hushed tones. They intend to cut off the weak from the geothermal vent entirely. They are replacing it with a new system, one that only the strong can access. It will begin within the cycle. They will be left to die. Jeremy felt a cold dread creep into his heart. "But why?" Lyra sighed. "The moderate elder. He was trying to buy us time. He knew his actions would be discovered, but he hoped to delay their plan long enough for you to arrive. He sacrificed himself for us." Astra's voice trembled. "He knew." Lyra nodded sadly. "He knew. He believed in what you were doing." Then Jeremy noticed something. The sanctuary residents, despite their physical ailments, seemed healthier than the patients he had seen earlier. He frowned. "How are they surviving the ventilation?" Lyra hesitated, then lowered her voice. "There is a plague spreading across Arcturus. The strong are vulnerable, but the weak, they are resistant. The genetic defect that causes their weakness also grants them immunity." Astra gasped, her eyes widening with horror. "That's it. That's why they want to eliminate us. They're not just trying to cleanse the gene pool. They're afraid of the plague. They believe we are a threat to their survival." Jeremy's mind raced. A plague, and a genetic resistance. He looked at Astra, his eyes filled with a sudden spark of hope. "We can use this. We can develop a cure based on their genetic resistance. But I need access to specialized Arcturian technology I do not have." Lyra nodded. "There is a research facility in the capital city. It is heavily guarded, but it contains the equipment you need." Astra stepped forward, her voice filled with newfound drive. "I know the city. I know the underground network. I can get you in." "It's too dangerous," Jeremy protested. "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking," Astra said, her eyes blazing with defiance. "I'm telling you, this is my fight too. Besides," she added, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips, "you'll need me to translate all that fancy medical jargon." Jeremy managed a weak smile in return. "All right, but I'm coming with you. My skills might be needed." As they prepared to leave, a small device on Lyra's wrist beeped urgently. She frowned, tapping a series of symbols, her face paled. A coded message from the moderate elder. She looked up, her eyes filled with fear. "He says, the elders know about the sanctuary. He revealed its location under torture. They're sending a strike force. They're coming now." Before they could react, the ground began to tremble. The flickering bioluminescent fungi cast dancing shadows on the walls as the sounds of heavy footsteps echoed through the cavern. The sanctuary was under attack. The sanctuary was a symphony of screeching alarms and the concussive thud of energy weapons impacting the outer walls. Red emergency lights strobed across the faces of the wounded, their wide, fearful eyes reflecting the chaos. Jeremy, his hands slick with iridescent Arcturian blood, barked orders in rapid Terran Arcturian pidgin. "Move, move." Those who can walk help those who can't. Astra, where are those grav stretchers? Astra, her normally calm demeanor fractured by urgency, pointed a trembling three-fingered hand towards a storage alcove. Over there, but the power grid is failing. Half of them are offline. Jeremy cursed under his breath. He grabbed a discarded medkit, its contents already depleted, and ripped open a fresh pack of synth skin. A young Arcturian, barely more than a hatchling, lay gasping on a makeshift cot, a gaping wound in his flank. "Hold still," Jeremy muttered, pressing the synth skin against the wound. It wouldn't hold for long, but it would buy them time. "We need to create a diversion," Jeremy yelled over the din, glancing at Astra. "Something to draw their fire away from the escape route." Without waiting for a response, he grabbed a portable holographic projector from a nearby table. He quickly programmed it to project a repeating image of a full platoon of human soldiers charging towards the main entrance, a bluff, but one he hoped would buy them precious minutes. He tossed a thermal grenade towards the same entrance and activated the projector. The grenade detonated with a flash and a bang, followed by the ghostly image of charging soldiers. "That will only hold them for a few minutes," Astra shouted, pulling him towards a narrow corridor. "This way, I know a hidden passage." They hurried down the corridor, a stream of wounded Arcturians struggling to keep pace. The passage was cramped and poorly lit, the walls damp and slick with condensation. Suddenly, a section of the ceiling collapsed with a deafening rumble, showering them with dust and debris. "No," Astra cried, her voice choked with despair. "The passage, it's blocked." A small group of Arcturians were trapped behind the collapsed section, their faces pale with fear. Jeremy scrambled over the rubble, assessing the situation. "It's not a complete collapse," he said, his voice strained. "I can clear some of it, enough to stabilize the passage, but it will take time." He pulled out his multi-tool and began to carefully cut away at the larger chunks of debris, mindful of the weakened structure. "Astra, find another way out. There has to be one." Astra, her face grimy with dust, disappeared back down the corridor, her footsteps echoing in the silence that followed the collapse. Minutes stretched into an eternity as Jeremy worked, sweat stinging his eyes. Finally, he managed to create a small opening, enough to pass through one at a time. "All right, get through here quickly," he urged the trapped Arcturians. "But be careful, the passage is unstable." As the last of the trapped Arcturians scrambled through the opening, Astra returned, her face grim. "The elders knew about this route," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They've placed traps along the way." Panic flared in Jeremy's chest, but he pushed it down. "We can't go back. We have to find another way." Astra pointed towards a narrow opening in the wall, barely wide enough to squeeze through. "There's a ventilation shaft. It's small, but it might lead somewhere." One by one, they squeezed into the ventilation shaft, the metal grating cold against their skin. The air was thick with dust and the smell of stale ozone. As they crawled deeper into the shaft, the group became separated, their voices fading into the distance. Jeremy and Astra found themselves alone in a narrow section of the shaft. Up ahead, they could see a faint glimmer of light. As they crawled closer, they discovered the source. A severely injured Arcturian, his leg caught in a crude energy snare. The snare had burned deep into his flesh, leaving a blackened, smoking wound. "Help me," the Arcturian groaned, his voice weak with pain. "Please." Jeremy immediately went to work, assessing the damage. The snare had cauterized the wound, preventing blood loss, but the damage was extensive. "This is bad," he muttered. "I need to stabilize this before we can move him." He rummaged through his medkit, finding a small vial of painkiller and a roll of synth bandage. He injected the painkiller into the Arcturian's arm and carefully cleaned the wound. "This is going to hurt," he warned as he applied the synth bandage. The Arcturian winced in pain but remained silent. When Jeremy finished, the Arcturian rasped, There is another way, an old way. Not mapped on any system." He gestured weakly with his good hand. past the next junction, a hidden entrance to the city's underground network. Astra's eyes widened. That's just a legend. No one's used those tunnels in centuries. It is real, the injured Arcturian insisted. I used to play there as a hatchling. Astra hesitated. It's uncharted, she said, her voice imbued with doubt. We don't know what's down there. It could be even more dangerous than what we've already faced. Jeremy looked at the injured Arcturian, then at Astra. It's our best option, he said, his voice firm. We can't stay here. We have to take the risk. They reached the junction and, with the injured Arcturian's directions, found the entrance. It was a dark, gaping hole in the wall, hidden behind a loose panel of metal. A musty, ancient smell wafted from within. As they ventured into the darkness, the air grew thick with the scent of decay. The tunnel walls were rough and uneven, the ground littered with rubble and debris. Suddenly, they heard voices ahead. They pressed themselves against the wall, listening intently. Haven't seen anyone down here in cycles, one voice said. Thought the elders had sealed off all the entrances, another replied. Astra cautiously peeked around a corner. She gasped softly. Jeremy, look. Before them was a small, hidden community of weak Arcturians, living in isolation from the rest of their society. They were a ragtag group, their faces etched with hardship, but their eyes shone with a spark of defiance. A wiry Arcturian with cybernetic augmentations covering half his face stepped forward. Who are you? What do you want? We're refugees, Jeremy said, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. We're trying to escape the elders. The wiry Arcturian narrowed his eyes. The elders don't let anyone escape. What makes you think you'll be any different? We have to try, Jeremy said, his voice filled with persistence. We have people who need help. The wiry Arcturian hesitated for a moment, then nodded. All right, he said. I'll help you. I know this network better than anyone. I can tell you that the elders have been using advanced surveillance technology to monitor the underground network. We know, Astra said grimly. We already ran into one of their traps. There is a weakness in the facility's security that I can exploit, the tech whiz said, but only one person can fit into the network at a time. Astra stepped forward. I'll go. I know the city. I can disable the surveillance system. No, Jeremy said firmly. It's too dangerous. We'll go together. We'll create a distraction, draw their attention away from the network. But how? Astra asked, her voice filled with concern. Before Jeremy could answer, the tunnel was filled with the blinding flash of energy weapons. They dove for cover as shots ricocheted off the walls. Ambush. Jeremy yelled. They knew we were coming. He pulled out his sidearm and returned fire, his movements quick and precise. The wiry Arcturian and the other members of the hidden community joined in the fight, firing their own makeshift weapons. During the firefight, Astra managed to disable the surveillance technology with a well-aimed shot, but a stray energy blast grazed her arm. She cried out in pain, clutching her wounded limb. Astra, Jeremy shouted, his voice filled with concern. He glanced at her wound, then back at the advancing enemy. We have to get out of here. He grabbed a handful of thermal grenades from his belt and tossed them towards the enemy, creating a wall of smoke and fire. Move, move, move. They retreated deeper into the tunnels, the sound of gunfire echoing behind them. Finally, they reached a dead end, a seemingly sealed entrance to the research facility, its metal surface cold and unyielding. How to open it? How to open it? Jeremy muttered, his fingers tracing the seam of the sealed door. He glanced at Astra, slumped against the wall, her breathing shallow. A dark stain bloomed on her side, soaking through her makeshift bandage. Damn it. He knelt beside her, his medical training kicking in despite the alien surroundings. Astra, stay with me. What hurts the most? Her pale blue eyes flickered open, focusing on him with effort. My side, it burns. Jeremy gently probed the wound. It's serious, but I don't think anything vital is hit. We need to stop the bleeding and get you stabilized. This door, it's not helping. He rose and ran his hands along the cold metal of the sealed entrance. It wasn't just a simple lock. The seams were fused, reinforced with interlocking plates. This was a deliberate barrier designed to keep something or someone inside. "It's not just locked," he said, frustration lacing his voice. "It's structurally reinforced. We're not getting through this with brute force." Astra winced but managed a weak smile. There is a weakness, a structural anomaly. Section 7 Gamma, they never fully corrected it. A weakness, Jeremy's hope flared. What kind of weakness, and where's Section 7 Gamma? To the left, near the primary coolant conduit, a micro-fracture. In the support frame, it requires a specific frequency to exploit. Her voice faded and she coughed, a fleck of blood appearing on her lip. A frequency, some kind of sonic key. Jeremy scanned the lab, his eyes landing on a mangled piece of equipment, a twisted mass of wires and shattered crystal. It was part of the Elders' empathy suppression tech, ripped apart during their earlier struggle. "That might work," Astra whispered, following his gaze. "The resonating core, if you can isolate it." Jeremy moved to the wreckage, his fingers gingerly probing the sharp edges. The core was intact, a pulsating crystal that hummed with a faint energy. He carefully detached it, wincing as shards of glass pricked his skin. He needed a way to amplify the frequency, to focus it. A conduit. He spotted a length of flexible tubing, likely used for coolant. Working quickly, he jury-rigged a makeshift amplifier, connecting the resonating core to the tubing, using salvaged wires to complete the circuit. It looked like something out of a mad scientist's lab, but it was his best shot. As he worked, a low, guttural growl echoed through the lab. It was distant but growing closer. "They're coming," Astra gasped, her eyes wide with fear. "The Elders, they know we're here." Jeremy ignored the rising panic in his chest. He had to focus. He had maybe minutes to get through this door. He adjusted the frequency dial on his makeshift device, a high-pitched whine filling the air. "Hold on," he said, his voice tight with concentration. "This might get loud." He aimed the tubing at the seam of the door and activated the device. The resonating core pulsed with increasing intensity, the whine escalating into a deafening screech. The metal of the door vibrated violently. Suddenly, with a grinding groan, a section of the door buckled inward. A narrow opening appeared, just large enough to squeeze through. "We did it!" Jeremy exclaimed, adrenaline surging through him. He helped Astra to her feet, supporting her weight as they stumbled through the breach. The opening led to a narrow, dimly lit corridor. The air was thick with humidity and a strange, earthy smell. This wasn't a lab. This was something else entirely. The corridor opened into a vast, underground cavern. Bioluminescent plants glowed with an ethereal light, illuminating a garden unlike anything Jeremy had ever seen. Strange, alien flora grew in abundance, their leaves shimmering with iridescent colors. Fruits of bizarre shapes and sizes hung from twisting vines. The air hummed with a low, resonant energy. What is this place?" Jeremy whispered, awestruck. Suddenly, a holographic image flickered into existence before them. It was a tall, slender Arcturian, its features softened by age. Its form shimmered slightly as if it were made of pure light. "Greetings," the AI said, its voice calm and soothing. "I am the caretaker of this facility. I have been dormant for some time. I am designated guardian." "Caretaker of what?" Jeremy asked, his heart pounding. "Of this garden," the AI replied, gesturing to the surrounding flora, "and of its original purpose." "Original purpose?" Astra echoed, her voice weak but filled with curiosity. "This facility," the AI explained, "was not built to suppress weakness. It was built to enhance empathy." Jeremy stared at the AI, his mind struggling to process this revelation. Enhance empathy, but the Elders. "The Elders repurposed this facility," the AI interrupted. "They twisted its original purpose to suit their own agenda. They feared empathy. They saw it as a threat to their control." The AI glided towards a cluster of glowing plants, its translucent hand passing through their leaves. These plants contain compounds that can accelerate healing and enhance mental abilities. They are designed to foster understanding and connection. Healing. Jeremy's eyes widened. He looked at Astra, her face pale and drawn. Can they help her? Indeed, the AI replied. They can accelerate her healing process and strengthen her resilience. With the AI's guidance, Jeremy carefully harvested several of the glowing fruits. He crushed them into a paste and gently applied it to Astra's wound. The paste shimmered and pulsed with light, and a faint, sweet fragrance filled the air. Astra gasped as the paste made contact with her skin. It tingles, it feels. Warm, within moments the bleeding began to slow. The color returned to Astra's face and her breathing became deeper and more regular. It's working, Jeremy said, relief washing over him. It's actually working. Astra looked at the plants, her eyes filled with wonder. The genetic signature. It's similar to my own, the so-called weakness. It's connected to this place. Indeed, the AI confirmed. Those who are deemed weak possess a unique sensitivity to the energies of this garden. They are more attuned to empathy, to compassion, to understanding. Suddenly, a warning klaxon blared through the cavern. The holographic AI flickered, its expression turning grave. The elders are aware of the breached entrance, it said. They are sending specialized forces. You must leave this place immediately. Specialized forces. Jeremy's hand instinctively went to his sidearm. How much time do we have? Not much, the AI replied. They will be here soon. Jeremy's mind raced. They couldn't fight their way out. They were outnumbered and outgunned. He needed a plan. He looked at the plants, at the strange fruits, at the humming energy that filled the cavern. An idea began to form in his mind. A dangerous idea, but perhaps their only chance. Guardian, he said, his voice firm. Can you manipulate the growth patterns of these plants? I can, the AI replied. I can control their growth, their energy output, their chemical composition. Then we're going to create a diversion, Jeremy said. We're going to give them something to remember us by. He began to explain his plan, outlining a strategy to use the garden's unique properties against their pursuers. Following Jeremy's instructions, the AI began to manipulate the growth patterns of the plants, causing them to release a potent neurotoxin. The air shimmered with iridescent particles, and a faint, bitter odor filled the cavern. They worked quickly, flooding a section of the tunnels with the neurotoxin, creating a temporary barrier against the pursuing forces. It wouldn't stop them for long, but it would buy them some time. As they navigated deeper into the garden, they stumbled upon a hidden chamber. Inside, rows of cryogenically frozen Arcturians lay suspended in stasis pods. Their bodies were twisted and deformed, their faces contorted in expressions of agony. What are these? Astra whispered, her voice filled with horror. Failed experiments, the AI replied, its voice tinged with sadness. Arcturians who were too empathetic. Their minds could not withstand the intensity of their emotions. They were deemed unstable. Jeremy stared at the frozen figures, a chill running down his spine. This was the dark side of empathy, the potential for it to overwhelm and destroy. Suddenly, a voice boomed through the cavern, echoing with authority. You cannot hide from us, traitors. Your compassion is a disease that must be eradicated. The elders' specialized forces appeared at the entrance to the chamber, their weapons drawn, but they were not led by a mere soldier. Leading the charge was one of the elders himself, his face contorted with rage. The elder stepped forward, his eyes blazing with hatred. I was once deemed weak myself, he growled, his voice thick with venom. But I survived, and now I will destroy that weakness once and for all. The elder didn't hesitate. One moment he was a looming figure in the doorway, the next he was a blur of motion, his hand a metallic fist aimed at Jeremy's head. Jeremy ducked, the blow whistling past him, and stumbled backward into the dense foliage. The air shimmered as the elder moved, revealing the subtle distortions of a cloaking field woven into his armor. Augmentations, Jeremy realized, far beyond anything he'd anticipated. This wasn't just a guard, this was a weapon. Astra cried out, scrambling back, her hand instinctively reaching for a cluster of glowing fungi. Jeremy grabbed a handful of the broad, leathery leaves of a nearby plant, recalling what Astra had told him about its mildly neurotoxic properties. He hurled them at the elder, hoping to slow him down. The leaves burst against the elder's cloaking field, momentarily disrupting the shimmer. He swatted them away with contemptuous ease, but Jeremy saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes before he resumed his advance. A hesitation that didn't match the ruthless efficiency of his movements. Astra, recovering, hurled a handful of the glowing fungi. They exploded in a shower of bioluminescent spores, coating the elder in a sickly green light. He roared, swatting at the spores, momentarily blinded. "Astra now!" Jeremy yelled, grabbing her hand, but Astra didn't move. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, her body trembling. A low moan escaped her lips. "Pain, so much pain," she whispered, collapsing to her knees. The elder, having cleared the spores from his vision, advanced on them. Jeremy stepped in front of Astra, shielding her with his body. You suffer," the elder rasped, his voice a synthesized growl. "But suffering is weakness, it must be purged." He raised his augmented arm, a blade extending from his wrist. "I was born weak. I was discarded, but they remade me. They excised the empathy, the weakness. They made me strong." He paused, his gaze flickering down to Astra, a strange mix of pity and disgust in his eyes. "They experimented, probed, cut. They wanted to create the perfect Arcturian, and they succeeded. I am what you could never be." Jeremy, seeing Astra's distress, grabbed a syringe from his medical kit. He'd adapted it for Arcturian physiology, a desperate attempt to replicate the effects of adrenaline. He plunged it into Astra's neck. "This might hurt," he muttered, injecting the modified stimulant. Astra gasped, her eyes snapping open. The trembling subsided, replaced by a flicker of awareness. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice still shaky. Jeremy turned back to the elder. "They didn't make you strong," he said, his voice firm. "They made you a monster, and for what? To perpetuate this cycle of suffering. Is this what you truly want?" The elder's face contorted, a flicker of something akin to pain crossing his features. For a moment, Jeremy thought he might be reaching him. "It is necessary," the elder snarled, his voice regaining its cold edge. "The weak must be culled. It is the only way for our species to survive." He pressed a button on his wrist gauntlet. A klaxon blared and the garden doors slammed shut, sealing them inside. "What did you do?" Astra gasped. "Ensured your experiment ends here," the elder said. "The elders have deemed it a failure. This entire facility will be purged." Jeremy felt a cold dread creep into his heart. "Purged? What does that mean?" "Incinerated," the elder replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "Every plant, every creature, every frozen Arcturian, all cleansed." Jeremy's blood ran cold. The frozen Arcturians. They were sentencing them to death. "We can't let that happen," he said, his voice tight with persistence. "They deserve a chance." "There's a service tunnel," Astra said, her voice regaining strength. "It leads outside the facility. We can use it to escape." "Then let's go," Jeremy said, grabbing a cryogenic pod. It was heavier than he expected, the Arcturian inside a dead weight. "We're taking as many of these as we can." They struggled to move the pods, their weight amplified by the slippery moss-covered floor. As they maneuvered one pod around a towering fern, Jeremy noticed a faint tremor running through the ice. "Astra, look," he exclaimed. Astra peered at the pod. "Reanimation. It's starting." Suddenly, the ice cracked and a hand burst free, its fingers twitching violently. The Arcturian inside thrashed, its eyes snapping open, filled with a primal terror. It lunged at Astra, a guttural scream tearing from its throat. Jeremy reacted instantly, slamming the Arcturian back into the pod and sealing the crack with a quick burst of sealant from his medkit. The creature continued to thrash inside, its screams muffled but no less terrifying. Astra stumbled back, clutching her arm. Blood welled between her fingers. "It It attacked me, she gasped. Jeremy examined her arm. The wound was shallow, but the skin around it was already turning red and inflamed. It's infected, he said grimly. He reached for his medkit but then hesitated. He felt a strange tingling in his hands, a warmth spreading through his veins. He placed his hand over Astra's wound. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice weak. Jeremy didn't answer. He focused his energy, channeling the warmth in his hands. He remembered the feeling of empathy, the connection he'd felt with the plants, with Astra, with all the life in this garden. He focused that feeling, directing it towards the wound. The redness began to fade. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. Astra stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. How did you do that?" she whispered. I don't know," Jeremy said, equally stunned. "But I think being around you, around all this, it's changed me." A sudden crash echoed through the garden. The elder, he'd found them. He stood at the entrance to the service tunnel, blocking their escape. "Your altruism is touching," he sneered, "but ultimately futile." He raised his hand, and the holographic AI caretaker which had been guiding them flickered and died. The lights dimmed, and a series of automated security doors slammed shut, further isolating them. The elder advanced, his augmented arm raised, ready to strike. "It ends here." He moved with blinding speed, disarming Jeremy with a swift kick and grabbing Astra by the throat. "Let her go," Jeremy yelled, lunging forward. The elder slammed Jeremy against a cryogenic pod, the impact knocking the wind out of him. He crumpled to the ground, gasping for air. The elder dragged Astra towards a secure door, his grip tight on her throat. "You will both await the elder's judgment," he said, his voice cold and devoid of any emotion. The door hissed open, and the elder shoved Astra through, disappearing into the darkness beyond. The door slammed shut, leaving Jeremy alone in the dim, silent garden, the fate of Astra and the frozen Arcturians hanging in the balance. The holding cell was a study in cold efficiency. Polished silver walls reflected the harsh, unwavering light, offering no shadows, no comfort. A narrow cot, fabricated from the same unforgiving metal, was bolted to the floor. Astra sat on it, her breathing shallow, her normally vibrant blue skin dulled to a bruised indigo where the guards had restrained her. Jeremy knelt beside her, his fingers tracing the line of a fresh laceration on her arm. The Arcturian restraints were not designed for Arcturians of her slight build. He channeled his energy, the familiar warmth spreading through his hands. He felt a stronger pull this time, a deeper connection to the life force he was mending. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but his healing abilities felt amplified. "I failed," Astra whispered, her voice raspy. I thought if I could just reach him, make him feel what the others feel." Jeremy stilled his hands, lifting his gaze to meet hers. "You didn't fail, Astra. You tried, you showed them there's another way. That takes courage. But it accomplished nothing. He dismissed me, he dismissed them." Her lower antennae drooped in despair. Jeremy cupped her face, his thumbs gently stroking her cheek ridges. "Your empathy isn't a weakness, Astra. It's your greatest strength. It's what makes you. You." He paused. "Tell me about him, the lead elder. What motivates him? What are his weaknesses?" Astra hesitated, her gaze unfocused. Before the elders, he was a scientist, a promising one. He researched neural pathways, empathy. Ironically, she shivered. Then he volunteered for the Unity experiments. They believed it would strengthen their perseverance, eliminate dissent. It seems to have worked. A metallic click echoed from the cell door. The lead elder stood there, impassive, his multifaceted eyes scanning them with cold calculation. He didn't speak, didn't move, simply observed. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Jeremy rose, stepping towards the energy field that separated them from the elder. "You were a scientist, weren't you? A researcher. You understand the value of experimentation, of questioning assumptions." He kept his voice calm, reasonable. "Isn't this entire facility an experiment, observing us, studying our reactions?" The elder remained unmoved. "The elders have reached their decision. Resistance is futile." His voice was a low, resonant hum devoid of emotion. The hum intensified as the cell door hissed open. Two heavily armored Arcturian guards flanked a procession of elders, their faces grim, their eyes narrowed with disapproval. The lead elder stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over them. "Astra, your deviation will be corrected. You will undergo Ray education. Dr. Jackson, your influence is of scientific interest. You will be confined to this facility for further study." A gasp escaped Astra's lips. The lead elder continued, his voice ringing with finality. "Furthermore, to prevent further contamination, the garden, the frozen Arcturians, will be destroyed. All specimens are to be incinerated." A tremor ran through the ranks of elders. One, younger than the rest, stepped forward, his antennae twitching nervously. But they deserve a chance. They are still Arcturians." The lead elder silenced him with a withering glare. "Sentimentality, a human weakness, it clouds judgment." In that instant, Jeremy saw his chance. The lead elder's focus was momentarily diverted. He reached out, extending his hand through the energy field. It flickered, momentarily disrupted, as his fingers brushed against the elder's arm. He channeled a small, concentrated burst of his healing energy, not to heal, but to share. The lead elder recoiled as if struck, his multifaceted eyes widening in shock and pain. He stumbled back, clutching his arm, a guttural sound escaping his throat. Jeremy turned to Astra, his voice low and urgent. I think he felt it. The pain, the suffering he's inflicted." "Just a fraction, but maybe." The conflicted elder, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope, seized the opportunity. He deactivated the energy field with a flick of his wrist. "Guards, a malfunction, seal off this sector." He shoved Jeremy and Astra towards a service corridor. "Go, I'll create a diversion." They didn't hesitate. Jeremy grabbed Astra's hand and they sprinted into the dimly lit corridor, the sounds of shouting and confusion echoing behind them. "We have to save them," Astra said, her voice filled with desperate purpose. "We have to save the frozen." The lead elder, recovering from the shock, roared with fury. "Seize them, destroy the garden. Jackson is more dangerous than we anticipated." The High Elder's command ripped through the air, an icy blade severing any hope of sanctuary. Jeremy grabbed Astra's hand, pulling her toward a maintenance hatch concealed behind a trellis of bioluminescent vines. "This way," she gasped, her voice tight with adrenaline. "I know the ventilation system." They squeezed through the narrow opening, the air immediately thick with dust and the metallic tang of recycled air. The ventilation shafts were a claustrophobic maze, barely wide enough for them to crawl through. Astra, despite her weakened condition, navigated with surprising confidence, her fingers tracing the embossed schematics on the grimy metal walls. Jeremy trusted her implicitly, his senses on high alert for any sign of pursuit. After what felt like an eternity, Astra stopped before a larger access panel. "This leads to a restricted storage area," she whispered, her breath misting in the cool air. "It's filled with outdated medical equipment. It might give us some cover." Jeremy pried open the panel, revealing a dimly lit chamber filled with towering stacks of deactivated medical devices. The air smelled of ozone and decay. He scanned the equipment, his heart sinking. Most of it was obsolete, its crystal interfaces cracked and its power cells long depleted. "Anything useful?" Astra asked, her voice strained. He moved towards a row of cryogenic stasis pods, their transparent shells clouded with frost. Inside, he could make out the pale forms of Arcturians suspended in cryogenic sleep. "They're being kept frozen," he murmured, touching the cold surface of a pod. He pressed his ear against the shell, listening for any sign of life. Faint, almost imperceptible pulses flickered on the internal monitors. Their life signs were fading. Astra approached a control panel, her fingers flying across the archaic interface. "There's a power source nearby," she said, her voice tinged with hope. "If I can reroute it." As her fingers danced across the controls, a klaxon blared, shattering the silence. Red lights pulsed throughout the chamber. "Alarm!" she cried. I triggered a security system. Ignoring the blaring alarm, Jeremy focused on the frozen Arcturians. He pulled open one of the pods, revealing a young female with delicate features. He quickly assessed her condition, his medical instincts seeking in. He placed his hand on her chest, attempting a combination of human CPR and Arcturian energy stimulation techniques. He poured his own healing energy into her, willing her back to life. But her vitals remained faint, barely a flicker against the encroaching darkness. Suddenly, a familiar voice echoed through the chamber. "You shouldn't be here, Dr. Jackson," the conflicted elder said, his face etched with a mixture of concern and resignation. "This facility is under lockdown. The automated defenses are now active. You must leave immediately." Before Jeremy could respond, a metallic whirring filled the air. A security drone, armed with energy weapons, materialized from the shadows, its optical sensors locking onto them. "Intruders detected," a synthesized voice announced. "Engaging lethal force." The drone opened fire, energy bolts searing through the air. Jeremy shoved Astra behind a stack of deactivated medical consoles, shielding her from the attack. He grabbed a discarded energy scalpel from a nearby table, activating its power cell. It was a crude weapon, but it was all he had. Astra, despite her weakened state, was already working. She scrambled behind the drone, her fingers flying across its exposed circuitry. "I can reroute its energy output," she yelled over the din of the alarm and the drone's weapons fire. "Give me a moment." Jeremy dodged another energy blast, the heat singeing his hair. He lunged forward, slashing at the drone with the energy scalpel, creating a diversion for Astra. With a final surge of energy, Astra completed her work. The drone shuddered, its weapons system sputtering, and then collapsed to the floor, its internal power grid overloaded. The conflicted elder watched the scene unfold, his expression grim. "There's a hidden escape route," he said, his voice barely audible above the alarm. "It leads through a heavily contaminated zone, but it's your only chance." Without hesitation, Jeremy scooped up Astra into his arms. "Lead the way," he said, his voice firm. The elder guided them through a series of narrow corridors, the air growing increasingly thick with a noxious metallic stench. Warning sirens wailed, and hazard lights flashed ominously. "This area was used for experimental weapon development," the elder explained. "The contamination levels are extremely high." Jeremy stopped, his eyes scanning their surroundings. He closed his eyes, focusing his healing energy. He created a shimmering, translucent barrier around himself and Astra, a temporary shield against the toxic environment. "This will only last for a few minutes," he said, his voice strained. "We need to move quickly." They pressed on, their footsteps echoing in the deserted corridors. They rounded a corner and nearly collided with a group of Arcturian scientists huddled in a small alcove. The scientists looked up, their faces a mixture of fear and hope. "Dr. Jackson," one of the scientists said, his voice hushed. "We heard you were here. We oppose the elders' policies. We want to help." "We know how to wake them," the lead scientist said, gesturing towards the frozen Arcturians. "But it requires a specific energy signature, one that only the elders possess." "We can create a diversion," the lead scientist offered, his eyes filled with purpose. "It will give you a chance to infiltrate the elders' chamber and obtain the energy signature." As Jeremy and Astra prepared to leave, the conflicted elder stepped forward, his face etched with remorse. I should have done more," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I pledge to help you from within. I will provide you with information and assistance however I can." Suddenly, a squad of guards led by a hulking Arcturian enforcer with cold, reptilian eyes burst into the corridor, weapons raised. "There they are," the enforcer snarled. "Seize them." The guards opened fire, energy bolts ripping through the air. Jeremy shoved Astra behind him, deflecting the blasts with his energy shield. The lead scientist stepped forward, drawing the guard's attention. "Run," he yelled. "Save the others." In the chaos, Astra was struck by a stray energy bolt, collapsing to the ground. The power source she had been carrying, the key to reviving the frozen Arcturians, was knocked from her grasp, its crystal casing shattering on the floor. The lead scientist fell, riddled with energy blasts, his body crumpling to the ground. The remaining scientists were quickly subdued, their faces filled with despair. Jeremy knelt beside Astra, his heart pounding in his chest. Her breathing was shallow, her face pale. The power source was beyond repair, its energy leaking into the contaminated air. He looked back at the frozen Arcturians, their fate hanging in the balance. He looked at the lead scientist, now dead on the floor. He was out of time. He was out of options. He scooped up Astra into his arms, ignoring the searing pain in his own side. "We have to go," he said, his voice tight with desperation. "Now." He turned and fled, carrying the damaged power source and leaving the frozen Arcturians behind, the sounds of the guards' pursuit echoing in his ears. Imminent capture was now a certainty. The barrier flickered, a dying star sputtering against the oppressive green haze. A high-pitched whine pierced the air, followed by the acrid scent of ozone and burning plastic. Jeremy tasted metal on his tongue, a phantom sensation mirroring the sting on his exposed skin. He stumbled, Astra's weight a heavy anchor against his side. Astra coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "Barrier," she gasped, her hand clutching at her side. "It's failing." He could see it in her face, the unnatural pallor beneath her violet skin, the beads of sweat clinging to her brow. The contamination was exacerbating her injury, the genetic defect making her more vulnerable. He laid a hand on her wound, channeling what little energy he had left. A faint blue light emanated from his palm, a desperate attempt to cauterize the damage, to slow the spread of the poison. But the effort drained him, leaving him weaker, his vision swimming. "Hold on," he muttered, his voice raspy. "Just hold on." Ahead, a jagged silhouette clawed its way out of the swirling green mist. A structure, hope, fragile but real, flickered in his chest. He lurched forward, pulling Astra with him, his legs burning with exhaustion. The research outpost was a skeletal husk, its metal plating corroded, its windows dark and lifeless. Emergency lights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on the eye. Dust lay thick on every surface, undisturbed for what felt like centuries. But it was shelter. He helped Astra slump against a wall, her breathing shallow and ragged. "Stay here," he said, his voice strained. "I need to see if we can get the power back online." The power source was a mangled mess of wires, cracked conduits, and blackened circuits. He recognized the telltale signs of a containment breach. The core was intact, but the regulator was fried, requiring a rare isotope Xylos-7 to stabilize the energy flow. Xylos-7, naturally occurring only within the most heavily contaminated zones. "Damn it," he muttered, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. Astra, her voice weak but clear, spoke from behind him. "Section C4, the Xenobotany lab." They were studying Xylos-7's effects on local flora. He turned, surprised. "How do you know that?" My research," she whispered, before they reassigned me." He looked at her, a new understanding dawning. She wasn't just a victim, she was a scientist, an expert in her own right. "Can you guide me?" Despite her pain, a spark of grit ignited in her eyes. "Yes, I can." The Xenobotany lab was a twisted mockery of its former purpose. Vines, mutated by the contamination, snaked across the floor, their leaves shimmering with an oily sheen. The air hung thick with the stench of decay and something else, something acrid, metallic, and deeply unsettling. He moved cautiously, his pulse rifle raised, his senses on high alert. A guttural growl echoed from the shadows. Two glowing eyes materialized in the darkness, followed by the hulking form of a mutated creature, a Grocknar, its fur matted and festering, its teeth bared in a silent snarl. It lunged. He fired, the pulse rifle spitting bolts of energy. The Grocknar roared, staggered, but kept coming. He dodged its snapping jaws, the air whistling past his ear. He needed to find the Xylos 7 and fast. He was younger then, still green, full of naive optimism. A young girl, barely 10 cycles old, lay gasping on the bio bed, her lungs ravaged by a rare fungal infection. "We need isogel," his senior colleague had said, his voice grim. "Without it, she's gone." But the supply depot was empty. A transport ship had been delayed. Bureaucracy, apathy, and indifference had condemned her to die. He had watched, helpless, as her life flickered and faded, the image of her wide, pleading eyes forever burned into his memory. He slammed the Grocknar against a wall, the creature's skull cracking against the metal. He rummaged through the lab, his hands shaking, his mind racing. Vials, samples, data pads useless. Then, in a reinforced container, he saw it. Xylos 7. A small, glowing crystal, pulsating with raw energy. He grabbed it, ignoring the burning sensation in his hand. He had to get back to Astra. A flicker on the comm unit caught the corner of Elder Valerius' eye. He frowned, his brow furrowing. The enforcer's signal was garbled, barely registering. With a subtle gesture, he activated a dampening field, further disrupting the transmission. Let them stew in the contaminated zone a little longer. Time was running out for Jackson and the weakling, but perhaps, just perhaps, they could prove their worth before it was too late. Jeremy stumbled back into the outpost, his lungs burning, his body trembling. The Xylos 7 pulsed in his hand, radiating a faint, ethereal glow. He coughed, a thick, black phlegm splattering on the floor. The contamination was taking its toll. Astra looked up, her eyes filled with concern. "You're hurt." "I'll be fine," he lied, his voice hoarse. "I found the Xylos 7. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the power source. "The regulator, it needs a bypass. I can show you how." With trembling hands, she guided him through the process, her voice weak but precise. She rewired circuits, bypassed damaged components, and jury-rigged a makeshift conduit using scavenged parts. Her intelligence was astounding, her technical skills far beyond what he had expected. "Almost. There," she gasped, her fingers dancing across the control panel. "Now, activate the primary inductor." He flipped the switch. The power source hummed, sputtered, then roared to life, bathing the room in an unstable, flickering light. The energy output was erratic, fluctuating wildly. It was barely functional, but it was enough. A metallic clang echoed from outside. The enforcer, they had found them. "We need to go," Jeremy said, grabbing his pulse rifle. "Where?" Astra asked, her voice filled with despair. "Deeper," he replied, his face hardened. "Deeper into the contamination." They burst out of the outpost, the unstable power source crackling behind them. The enforcer and his squad were waiting, their weapons raised, their faces grim. Jeremy aimed the pulse rifle at the power source, firing a single shot. The unstable energy core overloaded, erupting in a blinding flash of light and a deafening explosion. The enforcer and his squad were thrown back, momentarily stunned. "Now!" Jeremy yelled, grabbing Astra's hand. They fled into the contaminated zone, the terrain their only ally. Twisted trees, jagged rocks, and pools of corrosive acid littered the landscape. They scrambled over obstacles, ducked under low-hanging branches, and wove through the swirling green mist. But Astra was weakening. Her steps faltered, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Finally, she collapsed, her body trembling uncontrollably. I can't," she whispered, her eyes filled with pain. "I can't go on." He knelt beside her, his heart sinking. He had failed, again. No, he wouldn't let it happen, not again. He scooped her up in his arms, his muscles straining, his body screaming in protest. He channeled what little energy he had left into her, his healing ability barely keeping her alive. He carried her through the twisted landscape, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He had to find a way out. He had to save her. They reached a chasm, a seemingly bottomless pit filled with a swirling, corrosive acid that hissed and spat. The enforcer and his squad emerged from the mist behind them, their weapons trained on Jeremy. They were trapped. The chasm yawned, a black scar bisecting the corridor. Acid fumes curled upwards, stinging Jeremy's nostrils. He ignored the burning sensation, his gaze sweeping across the jagged edges, the slick, corroded walls, the impossibly distant bottom. There had to be another way. The enforcer clearly thought they were trapped, but Jeremy refused to accept that. He ran his hand along the wall, feeling for any handholds, any sign of a passage. Nothing. The rock was smooth, almost polished by the corrosive fumes. Astra coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "It's not just the acid," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. Her eyes were wide, unfocused. "The spores, in the chasm, they make you see things, bad things." A metallic voice boomed from above, amplified by a loudspeaker. "Running scared, human, smart, you're out of your depth. Should have stayed on your little blue world playing doctor to the weak. Here, weakness is a death sentence. Just give up, make it easy on yourself." Jeremy focused his mind, ignoring the enforcer's taunts. He had to focus. He ran his eyes over the equipment he had, his belt, medical kit, some cord from the outpost. Maybe it was enough. He had to get Astra out of here. The only way across was over. A grim calculation settled in his mind. The chasm wasn't too wide, maybe 15 meters at its narrowest point, but the drop, the acid, and now these spores. It was a gamble, a desperate one. A flicker of memory, unbidden, surfaced. A young Jeremy, fresh out of med school, standing over a patient on Earth. A child with a rare genetic disorder. He had done everything he could, but it hadn't been enough. The child had died. The feeling of helplessness, of failure, still haunted him. He pushed the memory back, burying it deep. He couldn't afford to dwell on it now. Astra needed him. He turned to Astra, his face grim. "I'm going to try something," he said, his voice low. "It's risky, but it might give you the strength you need." "What?" "What is it?" she mumbled, her eyes darting around as if she were seeing things that weren't there. "I can temporarily boost your immune system, give you a surge of adrenaline. It'll make you stronger, faster. But it's only temporary, and it could have side effects. It could damage your nervous system." Astra looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Do it," she croaked. "Anything." Jeremy quickly prepped a hypospray, drawing a potent cocktail of stimulants and immune boosters from his medical kit. He pressed it against Astra's neck and injected the fluid. Her body jerked and she gasped. "It'll be rough for a few minutes," he said, his voice tight. "But it should help." He worked quickly, stripping cord from the damaged outpost equipment. He fashioned a makeshift harness, looping it around Astra's torso. Then, using his belt and more cord, he created a crude zipline system, securing one end to a sturdy outcropping on their side of the chasm. "I'm going to send you across first," he said, his voice firm. "The boost won't last long. You need to get to the other side before it wears off." Astra nodded, her eyes glazed. He clipped the zipline harness to the cable. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded again, her face pale. Jeremy gave her a shove. Astra slid across the zipline, her body swaying precariously. The acid fumes billowed around her and the air shimmered with the unseen spores. As she neared the center of the chasm, her movements became erratic. She cried out, a strangled sound. "They're here, I see them. They're laughing." She lost her grip, her hands flailing. For a moment she dangled, suspended only by the harness. Jeremy lunged forward, grabbing the zipline cable with both hands. He pulled with all his might, his muscles screaming. Slowly, agonizingly, he hauled Astra towards the other side. She reached the edge, collapsing onto the ground, gasping for breath. Jeremy secured the zipline on her side and took a deep breath, trying to ignore the acrid smell and the creeping feeling of unease. He clipped himself into the harness and pushed off. The spores hit him like a wave. Images flooded his mind, the child's face, contorted in pain, his own hands stained with blood, the Arcturian elders, their faces filled with contempt. He gripped the zipline cable, his fist clenched. He couldn't let go, he had to make it. "Pathetic," the enforcer's voice echoed. You can't save them all, human. You'll just end up like that child. He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting against the hallucinations. He focused on Astra, on the feeling of her hand in his, on the oath he had sworn. Suddenly, he felt a tug. He opened his eyes to see Astra, her face pale but determined, pulling him towards the edge. He scrambled onto the ground, collapsing beside her. The enforcer appeared at the edge of the chasm, his face contorted with rage. He raised his weapon and fired blindly into the chasm. Acid splashed, and the zipline cable snapped. Jeremy and Astra stumbled away from the edge, deeper into the contaminated zone. They were safe. For now, but their temporary safety was an illusion. A thick fog rolled in, swirling around them, obscuring everything. The air grew heavy, and the effects of the psychic spores intensified, twisting their perceptions, amplifying their fears. The fog seemed to whisper, promising madness and despair. The thick fog clawed at Jeremy's mind, each tendril a memory, a regret. He was back in the sterile white of the Earthside clinic, the frantic beeping of the heart monitor a deafening symphony of failure. A child, no older than 10, lay pale and still on the table, her chest rising and falling shallowly. He remembered the frantic sweat on his brow, the desperate pump of the ambu bag, the sinking feeling as her heart flatlined. "I'm sorry," he heard himself say, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." The child's face morphed, becoming Astra's, her eyes wide with fear. "Jeremy, focus." Astra's voice, though weak, cut through the haze. He felt her small hand, its usually firm grip now trembling, tugging at his arm. "Your oath, remember your oath." He blinked, the sterile white dissolving into the swirling green fog. Astra's face, etched with worry, was inches from his. He shook his head, the weight of the hallucination receding, replaced by the immediate need to protect her. "Astra, you okay?" he rasped, his voice hoarse. They stumbled onward, the fog pressing in, distorting the landscape. Shapes writhed in the periphery, coalescing into grotesque parodies of life. Twisted, multi-limbed creatures, their bodies bloated and pulsating, lumbered through the haze. One, resembling a canine but with far too many eyes, snarled, its teeth dripping a phosphorescent slime. They were creatures warped by the psychic spores, adapted to the contamination in ways that defied natural law. "Wait," Astra coughed, her hand reaching out to a patch of luminous moss clinging to a rock face. This might help." She plucked a few strands, their light pulsing faintly. "Xylose moss. It contains compounds that can temporarily suppress the spore's effects." They chewed the moss, its bitter taste coating their tongues. A wave of clarity washed over Jeremy, the hallucinations receding, the oppressive fog seeming to thin just a little. The relief was short-lived, a temporary reprieve in a suffocating nightmare. Ahead, half hidden by the swirling fog, was a collapsed tunnel entrance, choked with debris. Jagged rocks and twisted metal formed an impassable barrier, but Jeremy saw a glimmer of possibility. "This could be it," he said, his voice regaining some strength. "Underground, away from the spores." The tunnel was unstable. Loose rocks shifted underfoot, threatening to give way. Jeremy, using his shoulder as a ram, began to clear the larger debris, grunting with effort. He dislodged a rusted support beam, sending a shower of sparks into the fog. Suddenly, the ground shifted. A section of the tunnel roof collapsed, sending a cascade of rubble crashing down, separating Jeremy from Astra. Dust filled the air, choking him. "Astra!" he yelled, his voice muffled by the debris. He clawed at the rocks, desperate to reach her. The stones were heavy, unyielding. His fingers bled, but he couldn't stop. He was failing again. He couldn't fail again. "Jeremy, stop!" Astra's voice, strained but clear, echoed from the other side of the rubble. "You'll bring the whole tunnel down there. There's a weak point to your left, the keystone." He fumbled for a tool, his hand finding a jagged piece of metal from the collapsed beam. Guided by Astra's directions, he located the keystone, a lighter-colored rock that seemed to hold the entire structure in place. He swung the metal shard, striking the keystone with all his might. The rock cracked, then crumbled. The tunnel shifted again, but this time a new passage opened, a narrow space just large enough to crawl through. "I'm through," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "Crawl." Astra emerged, coughing and covered in dust but alive. They didn't waste time celebrating. They crawled through the new passage, deeper into the earth. The passage opened into a vast cave system, shielded from the psychic spores. Bioluminescent fungi clung to the walls and ceiling, casting an eerie, ethereal glow. Strange rock formations jutted from the ground, resembling petrified trees. The cave showed signs of previous habitation. Crude markings adorned the walls, and the remnants of a long-dead fire pit lay in the center of the chamber. Had others found refuge here? A lost group of Arcturians, perhaps, or something else entirely? Jeremy found a partially intact filtration system, jury-rigged from scavenged parts. It was designed to purify water from a chasm that yawned at the far end of the cave. Next to it, etched into the wall, was a crude map depicting a series of tunnels and chambers. Astra, her eyes scanning the cave, pointed to a crumbling journal lying near the fire pit. Its pages were brittle and faded, but the Arcturian script was still legible. This is incredible," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "This journal, it belonged to outcasts, Arcturians who were banished for questioning the elders. They were studying ways to counteract their influence." She flipped through the brittle pages, her fingers tracing the faded script. They found a path leading to the opposite side of the testing area, away from the main outpost. A glimmer of hope, faint but undeniable, flickered in Jeremy's chest. They weren't trapped, there was a way out. Then a distant sound echoed through the tunnels, a low, guttural voice that sent a chill down Jeremy's spine. Searching, must eliminate, the weak, the enforcer. He was still hunting them, their brief respite was over. The air hung thick and heavy, tasting of damp earth and something else, something acrid and faintly metallic. Bioluminescent fungi, clustered like luminous grapes, pulsed with a soft, ethereal glow, their light barely piercing the oppressive darkness of the cave system. Jeremy ran a gloved hand along the slick, cold wall. "Feels like we're walking into the belly of a beast," he muttered. Astra, her three eyes gleaming in the dim light, moved with a confidence he lacked. "The tunnels shift and breathe, human medic. One must listen to them." They ventured deeper. The faint glow seemed to warp and distort the shadows, playing tricks on his eyes. A prickling sensation crawled across Jeremy's skin, a low thrumming in his temples. "Are you feeling this? Pressure." Astra paused, her antennae twitching. "Psychic residue, faint but persistent, the outcasts. They experimented here. It can disorient." The tunnel narrowed, forcing them to proceed single file. Jagged rocks jutted out from the walls, threatening to snag their suits. Astra, despite her physical limitations, navigated the treacherous terrain with surprising agility, pointing out hidden pitfalls and loose stones. "Careful here. The ground is unstable." Her knowledge of this place was remarkable, a testament to her resilience and resourcefulness. Trust, fragile as it was, solidified with each sure step she took. They reached a wider cavern. Here, the bioluminescent fungi grew in greater abundance, casting an eerie green light upon the remnants of a makeshift camp. Strange contraptions of metal and bone lay scattered across the floor, wires sparking intermittently. Runes etched into the walls pulsed with a faint, unnatural energy. The air here was thick with the metallic tang, amplified tenfold. Jeremy knelt beside a device cobbled together from scavenged parts. It resembled some kind of amplifier, its wires connected to a crude headset. "Psychic energy manipulation," he breathed, a knot forming in his stomach. The outcasts had been trying to weaponize something dangerous. Nearby, he spotted a damaged medical device, an Arcturian neural regulator. Hope flickered within him. This could potentially counteract the effects of the spores, but his optimism was short-lived. He examined the shattered components. Damn, the focusing crystal is gone, and the resonating chamber is cracked. These parts are unique. We'll never find replacements down here. Astra was examining a series of markings on the cavern wall. A map, she announced, tracing a line with her slender finger. Of the cave system, it is incomplete, but it shows a potential underground river. It may lead to the other side. Another false hope. Still, they followed the map's crude markings, the tunnel sloping downwards, the air growing colder and damper. Soon the trickle of water turned into a rushing stream and the stream into a subterranean river. The sound echoed off the cavern walls, a deafening roar. As they waded deeper, Jeremy heard a new sound, a chittering, skittering noise that sent shivers down his spine. Astra raised a hand, silencing him. Cave dwellers, territorial, hostile. From the shadows emerged a colony of creatures pale, eyeless beings with razor-sharp claws and teeth. They lunged, hissing and snapping. Jeremy reacted instantly, firing his stunner. Astra, quick and precise, hurled a handful of glowing fungi at the creatures, creating a momentary distraction. They worked as a team, utilizing the environment to their advantage, luring the creatures into narrow passages where they could be easily stunned. They pressed on, the river growing wider and faster until they reached a dead end. A massive underground waterfall cascaded down from the cavern ceiling, a thunderous torrent that blocked their path. The map had been wrong, or incomplete. Despair threatened to engulf him, but then as he stared at the cascading water, Jeremy noticed something. An unusual geological formation behind the waterfall, a dark, almost artificial-looking recess in the rock face. Astra, look. She followed his gaze, her eyes widening. A passage, hidden behind the water. They approached cautiously, the roar of the waterfall deafening. The passage was there, a narrow opening concealed by the cascading water, but it was guarded. A shimmering energy barrier pulsed with a menacing blue light blocking their way. Psychic energy, Astra confirmed, her voice tight. Linked to the Elder's technology, it is powerful. Can we bypass it? Jeremy asked, his mind racing. Astra shook her head. Not directly, but I theorize that it draws power from the psychic network above, if we can disrupt the flow. A long-shot hope at best. Jeremy pulled out his multi-tool, examining the energy barrier. It's a complex system, but I might be able to overload it, create a temporary disruption. He began to work, rerouting power conduits, bypassing safety protocols. The air crackled with energy. Stand back, he warned. He activated the device. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening roar, the energy barrier flared, overloading. A minor explosion ripped through the chamber, showering them with sparks and debris. Damn it! Jeremy cursed, coughing. Human medic, Astra cried, pointing upwards. He knows where we are. The enforcer's voice, amplified and distorted, echoed through the tunnels, closer now, more menacing than ever. Your interference ends here. But amidst the chaos, Astra had noticed something else. The explosion had dislodged a chunk of rock, revealing a hidden crystal within the wall. The crystal pulsed with a faint blue light, resonating with the energy barrier. The crystal. It is reacting to the barrier. It is amplifying the energy. Jeremy's eyes widened. A resonating crystal, if we can focus its energy. He grabbed the crystal, carefully positioning it against the energy barrier. The crystal glowed brighter, the barrier shimmering and distorting. Now, Astra yelled. Jeremy poured all the remaining power into the crystal. The barrier buckled, a temporary opening forming in its surface. Go now! They plunged through the opening, the energy barrier collapsing behind them, sealing them off from their pursuer, but also trapping them further inside the cave system. On the other side, they found themselves in a large chamber. The walls were covered in strange murals, depicting scenes from Arcturian history. But these were not the sanitized versions they were taught in school. These murals told a different story, a story of psychic manipulation and control. The elders were not benevolent leaders. They were suppressors. The murals depicted the elders using their psychic powers to control the weak, to silence dissent, to maintain their power. Rage, cold and hard, settled in Jeremy's gut. As they examined the murals, Astra noticed something. A faint line in the stone, almost invisible to the naked eye. A hidden passage, she whispered, tracing the outline with her finger. Behind the mural, she pushed against the stone. With a grinding sound, a section of the wall slid open, revealing a dark, narrow passage leading deeper into the unknown. Jeremy and Astra cautiously entered the hidden passage, the rough-hewn stone cool against their hands. The air immediately grew heavy, thick with a cloying sweetness that tickled the back of Jeremy's throat. It wasn't a physical scent, but something else, something psychic. The passage narrowed quickly, forcing them to proceed single file into a winding tunnel system that felt increasingly claustrophobic. The air grew colder, and the cloying sweetness intensified. Within moments, the psychic residue began to assault Jeremy's senses. The flickering light of his headlamp seemed to warp and bend, painting grotesque faces on the damp tunnel walls. Whispers too faint to understand tickled his ears. A wave of nausea washed over him, followed by a dizzying disorientation. He stumbled, reaching out to steady himself against the cold stone. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. A vision flashed before his eyes. A sterile white room, filled with Arcturians hooked up to strange machines, their faces blank and empty. "Jeremy, are you all right?" Astra's voice cut through the swirling chaos in his mind. Her hand, cool and steady, grasped his arm. He blinked, trying to focus on her face. "Hallucinations," he managed, his voice raspy. "Psychic residue, it's strong." He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting against the encroaching visions. Hard to differentiate. Astra's grip tightened reassuringly. "Focus on my voice, Jeremy, and the feel of my hand, this cave system. It amplifies the psychic energies, but I know the way, trust me." Her voice was a beacon in the storm, a grounding force in the face of the swirling hallucinations. She guided him forward, her touch a constant reminder of reality. As they continued deeper, the tunnel walls began to shimmer with an unnatural light. They were lined with crystals, large and jagged, that pulsed with a soft inner luminescence. The crystals hummed with an almost palpable energy, resonating deep within Jeremy's bones. "These crystals," Jeremy said, his voice still strained. "I think they're the source. They're amplifying the psychic energy, maybe even generating it." He reached out to touch one, then hesitated. "Somehow they're connected to those spores." He pulled back his hand. "If we could neutralize these, maybe we could stop the hallucinations." They pressed on, the tunnel twisting and turning, each corner revealing more crystals, more psychic residue. Eventually, they reached a small cavern, lit by the eerie glow of the crystals. Huddled in the shadows were a group of Arcturians, their faces gaunt and their eyes wide with fear. They flinched at the sight of Jeremy and Astra, drawing back into the darkness like frightened animals. "Don't be afraid," Astra said, her voice soft and soothing. "We're not here to hurt you." She took a step forward, her hands open and empty. "My name is Astra, and this is Jeremy. We want to help." The outcasts remained wary, their bodies tense and their eyes darting nervously between Jeremy and Astra. One of them, an elderly Arcturian with deep lines etched into his face, stepped forward slightly. "Why should we trust you?" he rasped. "Outsiders, they always bring trouble." Astra lowered her head slightly, a gesture of humility. "I understand your distrust. But we are not like the elders. We believe that everyone deserves to be treated with respect and compassion." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "I too have been rejected. I know what it's like to be an outcast." Her words seemed to resonate with the outcasts. The elderly Arcturian's expression softened slightly. "The elders," he whispered, his voice filled with bitterness. "They use the psychic energy to control us, to suppress our emotions, to make us conform." Another outcast, a young female with trembling hands, spoke up. "They say it's for the good of the community, that strong emotions are disruptive." Jeremy frowned. "So they're using this psychic network to enforce conformity, to suppress dissent?" Astra nodded grimly. It's more than just dissent, Jeremy. They suppress empathy, compassion, even joy. They want a society of emotionless drones, completely obedient to their will. Suddenly, a voice boomed through the cavern, echoing off the crystal walls. "So, you found the rat's nest." A tall, imposing Arcturian in black armor strode into the cavern, his face hidden behind a metallic mask. The Enforcer. The outcasts gasped, shrinking back in terror. Astra stepped in front of them, her hand instinctively reaching for the energy pistol at her side. "Enforcer," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that prickled at her skin. "Leave them alone. They've done nothing wrong." The Enforcer chuckled, a cold, mirthless sound. "They have defied the Elder's will. They have chosen weakness over strength. Their punishment is unavoidable." He raised his hand and a beam of energy shot from his palm, striking the crystal nearest to Jeremy. Jeremy reacted instantly, diving to the side as the crystal shattered, sending shards of shimmering energy flying through the air. He grabbed Astra's arm, pulling her behind a rocky outcropping. "We need a diversion," he shouted over the din. Astra nodded, her eyes scanning the cavern. "The crystals, if we can overload them." Jeremy grinned. "Exactly." He pulled out his multi-tool, quickly adjusting the settings. "Let's give him a light show he won't forget." Working quickly, Jeremy reconfigured the tool to emit a focused sonic pulse. Astra, meanwhile, began manipulating the cavern's limited light sources, creating a disorienting strobe effect. Together, they launched their attack. Jeremy fired the sonic pulse at another crystal, causing it to vibrate violently. Astra amplified the strobe effect, creating a blinding, chaotic display of light and sound. The Enforcer staggered, momentarily disoriented by the sensory overload. Taking advantage of the chaos, Jeremy aimed his pistol at the base of several other crystals, firing precise shots that cracked and weakened them. The psychic energy in the cavern fluctuated wildly, causing the Enforcer to clutch his head in pain. "Enough!" The Enforcer roared, his voice distorted by the psychic interference. He fired blindly into the darkness, forcing Jeremy and Astra to duck for cover. "Now!" Astra yelled, pulling Jeremy towards a narrow opening in the cavern wall. "This way, it leads to the sanctuary." They scrambled through the opening, the outcasts following close behind. The tunnel narrowed again, forcing them to crawl on their hands and knees. Behind them, they could hear the Enforcer crashing through the cavern, his heavy footsteps echoing through the tunnel system. Finally, they emerged into a large, circular chamber. The walls were smooth and polished, and the air was clean and fresh. In the center of the chamber stood a large, intricate device, humming with a low, resonant frequency. The sanctuary. The outcasts breathed a collective sigh of relief, their bodies relaxing slightly. This was their safe haven, a place where they could escape the Elder's control. "This device," Jeremy said, examining it closely. "It's some kind of psychic shield. It blocks the Elder's influence." He noticed several scorch marks and exposed wires, but it's damaged. The elderly Arcturian nodded. "The Enforcer. He attacked us before. He tried to destroy it." Jeremy ran his hand over the intricate circuitry. "I can fix it," he said, his voice filled with dedication. "I've worked with similar technology before." He pulled out his multi-tool again, preparing to begin the repairs. "It will take some time." As he worked, he noticed a small panel on the side of the device. He opened it, revealing a series of intricate schematics. As he traced the circuits, he noticed something strange, a hidden message embedded within the design. It was a complex series of symbols and codes, almost like a watermark. "Astra," he said, his voice hushed. "Take a look at this. There's something hidden in these schematics." Astra examined the symbols closely, her brow furrowed in concentration. This is an old code. I haven't seen it in years." "What does it mean?" Jeremy asked. "It's a message," Astra said, her voice filled with awe. "A message about how to disable the Elder's psychic network permanently." Jeremy stared at her in disbelief. "Disable it? How?" The message says, "The key lies within the Elder's citadel." She paused, her expression hardening, the most heavily guarded place on Arcturus. Jeremy's gaze snapped back to the schematics. So this device, it's not just a shield, it's a key. Astra traced one of the symbols with a trembling finger. This symbol. She looked up at Jeremy, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and fear. It's my family's crest, my ancestors. They were part of a resistance. I thought they were just stories. Suddenly, a section of the chamber wall exploded inward, showering them with dust and debris. The enforcer stood in the opening, his armor scorched and his mask cracked, but his eyes still burned with cold fury. Your sanctuary is no longer safe, he growled, raising his energy pistol. Jeremy and Astra exchanged a desperate glance. Stay and fight, protecting the outcasts, or flee, taking the chance to disable the Elders' network. The decision hung heavy in the air, a life or death choice with no easy answer. Jeremy scrambled forward, the low tunnel roof scraping against his pack. Behind them, the rhythmic thud of the enforcer's boots echoed, growing closer with each stride. Astra, her face grim, pointed to a narrow side passage. This way, the outcasts booby-trapped these tunnels years ago. Hopefully, some of them still work. They plunged into the darkness, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and something vaguely metallic. Astra, despite her physical limitations, moved with surprising agility, guiding Jeremy and the outcasts through the maze like passages. A tripwire, nearly invisible in the gloom, snagged the enforcer's foot. A section of the ceiling collapsed, showering him with rocks and dust. The pursuit slowed, but only momentarily. Further on, a pit concealed beneath a flimsy layer of woven vines nearly claimed the enforcer. He roared in frustration as he hauled himself out, his armor coated in mud, but the delay had cost them. Jeremy felt a searing pain in his side as a stray energy blast grazed him. He stumbled, clutching the wound. Jeremy, Astra cried, her violet eyes wide with concern. You're hit. Just a scratch, he gasped, though the blood seeping through his fingers told a different story. Keep moving, you need to lead. He leaned heavily on a nearby wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Astra hesitated, her face a mask of worry, then nodded, her determination hardening. She was no longer just the weak Arcturian. She was their guide, their protector. They pressed on, but the enforcer was relentless. Reaching a dead end, Jeremy cursed. Damn it, we're trapped. Astra looked around frantically. There has to be another way. Jeremy, ignoring the pain in his side, pulled out his multi-tool. There will be, just need to make one. He began stripping wires from a discarded power cell, his fingers moving with practiced speed. Astra, keep watch. Outcasts, gather any loose rocks you can find. What are you doing? Astra asked, her voice infused with anxiety. Improvising, Jeremy replied, his face grimy with sweat and dust. Making a little. Persuasion. Within minutes, he had rigged a makeshift explosive. Stand back. The tunnel shook violently as the explosive detonated, sending a shockwave of dust and debris through the air. A new passage, jagged and unstable, appeared before them, but the explosion had weakened the tunnel structure. A section of the ceiling groaned ominously. Move, move. Jeremy shouted, pushing Astra and the outcasts forward. They scrambled through the new passage just as a massive cave-in sealed off the tunnel behind them. The enforcer was cut off, but so were they. They were trapped. Darkness enveloped them. The air was thick with dust, making it hard to breathe. The outcasts cried out in panic. Jeremy slumped against the wall, his side throbbing. Quiet. Astra commanded, her voice surprisingly strong. We need to stay calm. She moved through the darkness, placing a hand on each of the outcasts, offering words of comfort. Jeremy watched, impressed by her unexpected leadership. He fumbled for his medical kit, his fingers clumsy with pain. He needed to stop the bleeding, but first he had a more pressing task. He pulled out the damaged shield device, its casing cracked and sparking. I need to fix this, he muttered, his voice strained. Can you? Astra asked, kneeling beside him. I have to, he replied, his gaze fixed on the intricate circuitry. Hours blurred as Jeremy worked, his pain a constant companion. He managed to stabilize the bleeding, but his focus remained on the device. As he tinkered with the alien tech, he discovered something unexpected. The shield device. "It's not just a shield," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "It uses a unique energy frequency to disrupt the psychic spores, a frequency that could also be used to trace the source." Astra's eyes widened. "You mean, we could find out where the spores are coming from?" "Exactly," Jeremy said, a flicker of hope in his voice. "And I think I know where to start looking." He paused. "The Elder's Citadel. But how do we get out of here?" Astra asked, gesturing to the tons of rock and earth that blocked their path. Jeremy looked around, his gaze hardening. "We dig." Using whatever tools they could find, shards of rock, pieces of metal, they began to dig. The work was slow and arduous, each movement sending a jolt of pain through Jeremy's side. But they pressed on, driven by a desperate hope. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they broke through. They emerged into a different part of the tunnel system, blinking against the dim light. "This way," Astra said, her voice filled with newfound confidence. "I know a place." She led them through a series of winding passages to a hidden chamber. In the center of the chamber stood a crude communication terminal, jury-rigged from scavenged components. "The outcasts use this to monitor the Elder's activities," Astra explained. "Maybe we can find something useful." Jeremy worked the terminal, his fingers flying across the alien interface. He intercepted a message, its meaning chillingly clear. "The Elders know we're alive," he said, his voice grim. "They're tightening security around the Citadel." Astra's face fell. "Then we're running out of time." "Maybe not," Astra said, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I have a distant relative who works within the Citadel, someone who might be willing to help us despite the risks." "Can you trust them?" Jeremy asked, his voice cautious. "I have to," she replied, her voice filled with a desperate hope. Astra activated the terminal, sending a coded message. A moment later, a reply came back, faint but clear. "It's her," Astra whispered. "She's willing to help." She turned to Jeremy, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. She confirmed the message, and she gave us a possible entry point into the Citadel. "But there's something else," Astra continued, her voice trembling. "She says, the shield device. It's not what it seems." "What do you mean?" Jeremy asked, his brow furrowed. "She says, instead of blocking the psychic spores, it might actually amplify the Elder's control," Astra said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jeremy stared at the device in his hand, his pupils dilating. Had he been helping the Elders all along? "We can't trust it," Astra said, her voice firm. "We have to destroy it." "No," Jeremy said, his voice equally resolute. "We don't destroy it, we use it." "Use it?" "But she said—" "I know what she said," Jeremy interrupted. "But if it can amplify the Elder's control, it can also disrupt it. We can use it to overload the psychic network, to break their hold on the Arcturian people." "It's too dangerous," Astra protested. "We don't know what will happen." "We don't have a choice," Jeremy said, his voice filled with unshakable focus. "We have to try." As they prepared to leave, a voice echoed through the tunnel. "I admire your tenacity," a familiar voice said. The enforcer stepped out of the shadows, his armor battered but his gaze unwavering. "But your efforts are futile. How did you find us?" Astra asked, her voice filled with dread. "I anticipated your every move," the enforcer replied, a hint of something akin to sadness in his voice. "I know these tunnels as well as you do." He paused. "I was once subjected to the Elder's psychic control. I know what they're capable of. I want revenge." Jeremy and Astra exchanged a look. The enforcer wasn't just a mindless servant, he was a victim driven by his own pain and anger. "Then help us," Jeremy said, his voice filled with a desperate plea. "Help us stop them." The enforcer hesitated, his face a mask of internal conflict. Then he shook his head. "It's too late for me. But I won't let you interfere." He lunged forward, his energy blade crackling with power. The fight was fierce and brutal. Jeremy, still weakened from his injury, fought with a desperate energy. Astra, using her knowledge of the tunnels, led the Enforcer into a series of traps, slowing him down but not stopping him. During the chaos, the shield device was knocked from Jeremy's hand, crashing against the wall. A surge of energy erupted from the damaged device, engulfing both Jeremy and the Enforcer. Jeremy cried out as a torrent of images flooded his mind. He saw the Elder's true intentions, a conspiracy far deeper and more sinister than he could have ever imagined. He saw the life draining from them, a pale, spectral energy flowing upward like smoke into intricate latticework above. The Elders, their faces gaunt and stretched, were bathed in the stolen light, their wrinkles smoothing, their movements regaining a youthful vigor. He saw the weak becoming weaker, their bodies shriveling, their minds fading, their very essence being consumed to fuel the Elder's unnatural longevity. Jeremy pushed himself up, the metallic tang of fear coating his tongue. He turned to Astra, his voice a low rasp. "They're not just controlling minds, Astra, they're siphoning their life force, stealing their energy to prolong their own lives." Astra recoiled, her blue skin paling further. "That's impossible even for them." But the horror in her eyes betrayed her disbelief. "We have to stop them," she breathed, her voice tight with fury, "at any cost." "We need proof," Jeremy said, his mind racing. "Something concrete, that shield device. It's amplifying the spore's effect, isn't it? We need to test it." He gestured to the captured psychic spore suspended in a containment field. "We'll use one of the outcasts as a control, see what happens with and without the shield." The test was brutal. They brought in Kalen, an outcast whose psychic sensitivity made him a pariah even among the weak. With trembling hands, Jeremy connected him to a neural scanner, monitoring his brain activity as they introduced a low-level psychic spore into the chamber. Kalen whimpered, his body contorting slightly, but the pain seemed manageable. Then they activated the shield device. Kalen screamed. The neural scanner spiked, lines of jagged energy erupting across the screen. His body thrashed violently against the restraints, his eyes rolling back in his head. Astra, her face etched with compassion, moved to shut it down, but Jeremy stopped her. "We need to see the full effect," he said grimly, his voice tight with perseverance. He watched, his stomach churning as Kalen endured the agony, a living testament to the Elder's cruelty. Finally, with Kalen unconscious and the scanner threatening to overload, Jeremy deactivated the shield. He stared at the data, his face hardening with each passing second. "It's even worse than I thought," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They're deliberately weakening their population to create a power source. They're not just eugenicists, they're vampires." A metallic clang echoed from the doorway. The Enforcer, his armor gleaming dully in the dim light, stood there, his expression a mask of barely suppressed rage. "Shield device, power source, what are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. Jeremy met his gaze, his mind weighing the risks. He had no choice. "The Elders are using the weak as fuel, Enforcer. They're siphoning their energy to extend their own lives. That shield device amplifies the effect, making them easier to control and to drain." The Enforcer's fists clenched, his knuckles turning white. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Fuel," he repeated, his voice imbued with disbelief and fury. They're using them as fuel." He looked at Kalen's unconscious form, then back at Jeremy, his eyes blazing with a cold, hard light. "I'll help you infiltrate the Citadel," he said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "But on one condition. I get to be the one to confront the Elders." Astra stepped forward, her expression troubled. "Enforcer, this is about more than revenge. It's about stopping them from destroying our society. Revenge is a powerful motivator, little empath," the Enforcer spat back, his focus unwavering. "And right now, it's the only thing keeping me from tearing this place apart." Astra sighed, defeated. Jeremy nodded. "We need your strength, Enforcer. We'll take your help on any terms." Astra, despite her misgivings, contacted her relative within the Citadel, a low-ranking technician named Lyra. The transmission was brief and tense, filled with coded language and veiled threats. Lyra, clearly terrified, provided them with a detailed map of the Citadel's ventilation system and a security bypass code. "She says the elders are expecting us," Astra reported, her voice tight with anxiety. "They've set a trap within the ventilation system. Guard patrols have been tripled." The enforcer snorted. "Let them come. I'm eager to test their defenses." Jeremy shook his head. "We use the ventilation system anyway. It's still our best chance to reach the elders undetected, even with the added security." He looked at Astra. "Can your outcasts help us navigate?" "They know the tunnels like the backs of their hands," Astra confirmed. "They can guide us through the blind spots, the forgotten passages." As they prepared to enter the ventilation system, a network of narrow, claustrophobic tunnels beneath the Citadel, the enforcer turned to Jeremy, his voice a low rumble. "There's one elder in particular I want to deal with personally. Elder Vorlag, he took something from me." "This is not the time for personal vendettas," Jeremy said, his voice firm. "We need to focus on the greater goal, stopping the Elder's plan." The enforcer's eyes narrowed, his gaze hardening. "Vorlag will pay for what he did. That is a promise." They reached a major junction in the ventilation system, a vast chamber where several tunnels converged. The map indicated that the path to the central control room lay directly ahead, but the tunnel entrance was now sealed off by a reinforced blast door. The enforcer pounded his fist against the door, the metal reverberating through the chamber. "Blast it all," he roared. "They've blocked our path. Lyra warned us about this," Astra said, her voice tinged with frustration. "She said they would try to cut us off." The enforcer paced back and forth, his frustration growing. "We don't have time for this. We need to find another way." He pointed to a narrow, unexplored tunnel leading off to the side. "That one looks promising." "No," Astra cried, her voice sharp. "Lyra specifically warned us to avoid that tunnel. She said it's riddled with traps and guarded by elite patrols." The enforcer ignored her. "I'm not waiting any longer," he snarled, his patience snaing. "I'm going in." He charged towards the tunnel entrance, disappearing into the darkness. Jeremy sighed, knowing they had no choice but to follow. "Let's go," he said to Astra, his voice resigned. "But be careful." As they crept through the narrow tunnel, the air grew thick with the smell of stale air and decay. Suddenly, a volley of laser fire erupted from the darkness ahead. Arcturian guards, their weapons blazing, ambushed them. The enforcer roared, charging into the fray, his massive frame a whirlwind of fury and destruction. He deflected laser bolts with his armored gauntlets, his energy blade flashing as he cut down the guards with brutal efficiency. But the guards were numerous, and their attacks were relentless. The enforcer took a glancing blow to the chest, his armor sparking and smoking. He staggered backward but continued to fight, his movements growing slower, his breathing ragged. Finally, with a guttural cry, he collapsed to the ground, his body riddled with laser burns. He had managed to kill several guards, but they were overwhelming him. Astra, her face pale with terror, raised her hands, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Stop!" she cried, her voice echoing through the tunnel. "Please stop. We don't want to hurt you." The remaining guards hesitated, their weapons wavering. But their loyalty to the elders was too strong. They opened fire again, their laser bolts tearing through the air. Jeremy, dodging the incoming fire, scrambled towards the enforcer, ethical training kicking in. He ripped open the enforcer's damaged armor, revealing a gaping wound in his chest. The enforcer was bleeding heavily, his breathing shallow and ragged. He had to act fast. Ignoring the laser fire whizzing past his head, Jeremy reached into his medical kit and began to work, his hands moving with practiced precision. He had to save the enforcer's life, even as Astra held off the guards, her empathy failing to penetrate their fanatic devotion. The gash across the enforcer's chest hissed, a plume of acrid vapor rising from the cauterized edges. Jeremy pressed a makeshift bandage of scavenged biomesh against the wound, its pale green surface quickly darkening with viscous violet blood. "Damn it," he muttered, ripping open the last sterile pack. "That's it, we're out." Astra, her brow furrowed with concern, cradled the enforcer's massive head in her hands. "Can you seal it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jeremy shook his head. "Not properly. He needs a full surgical suite stasis field. Something we don't have. This will slow the bleeding, but it's temporary." He glanced around the cramped, dimly lit chamber, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and the ozone scent of discharged energy weapons. "We need to move. Now." Astra nodded, her gaze hardening with determination. "My relative knew of other ways out." She touched a sequence on a nearby wall panel. A section of the wall slid inward, revealing a narrow, twisting passage barely wide enough for a single Arcturian. "It's not stable, parts of it have collapsed, but it's the only way." The enforcer, his voice a ragged rasp, managed a grimace. "Lead on. Better a tunnel collapse than their mercy." Jeremy went first, his flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. The passage was a chaotic jumble of fractured plasteel and exposed wiring, the air thick with dust and the unsettling creak of stressed metal. He could feel the vibrations of the citadel above, the relentless arch of enforcers surely closing in. The tunnel twisted and turned, descending at a steep angle. He could hear Astra and the enforcer behind him, their movements labored. The passage opened abruptly into a vast cavern, the air heavy with the stench of decay and despair. Flickering luminescent fungi cast an eerie glow on the scene before them, a sprawling shantytown of makeshift shelters cobbled together from scrap metal and discarded tech. Gaunt, emaciated Arcturians huddled around meager fires, their eyes hollow with resignation. This was the underbelly of the citadel, the place where the weak were left to rot. An elderly Arcturian, his skin a mottled gray and his limbs twisted with some unknown ailment, approached them cautiously, a rusty pipe clutched in his trembling hand. "Who are you?" he croaked, his voice raspy with disuse. "What do you want?" Astra stepped forward, her voice filled with compassion. "We mean you no harm. We are seeking shelter and a way to stop the elders." The old Arcturian's eyes narrowed. "The elders, you fight them? Impossible." "Not impossible," Jeremy said, his voice firm. "We need your help. We can help you." Hesitantly, the old Arcturian lowered his pipe. "Come, we will talk, but trust is a rare commodity down here." He led them deeper into the cavern, past the huddled figures and the flickering fires, to a slightly larger shelter constructed from salvaged ship plating. Inside, a small group of outcasts gathered around a crude table, their faces etched with hardship. Astra spoke to them, explaining their mission and their desperate need for information. The outcasts listened intently, their initial suspicions slowly giving way to cautious hope. "The elders," one of the outcasts said, a female with a cybernetic eye that glowed an unsettling green, "they prepare a ritual, a draining. They will take what little life we have left to prolong their own." "Draining?" Jeremy asked, his brow furrowed. "They have built a device," the outcast explained, "a siphon. It will draw energy from all the weak simultaneously, channeling it into the elders. They believe it will grant them extended life, even immortality." A wave of nausea washed over Jeremy. The elders' cruelty knew no bounds. He turned to the enforcer, who was slumped against the wall, his breathing shallow and ragged. "How are you holding up?" The enforcer coughed, a fleck of violet blood spattering on the ground. "Worse," he rasped. The pain is intense." Jeremy knelt beside him, his fingers probing the edges of the bandage. The wound was still bleeding and the enforcer's skin was clammy and cold. "I need to do something, now, but I don't have the equipment." Astra placed a hand on his shoulder. "What is it? What do you need?" "His cybernetics," Jeremy said, his voice grim. "They're interfering with his healing. The implants are rejecting the new biomesh. I need to disable them, at least temporarily, but I don't have the tools and I don't know the archery and tech well enough. Astra turned to the outcasts. Can anyone help us? Does anyone know how to disable Enforcer cybernetics? One of the outcasts, a young male with intricate tattoos covering his face, stepped forward. I can try. I used to work in the Citadel's repair bays. I know some of the systems. As the outcast began to examine the Enforcer's implants, Astra turned back to the others. What else do you know about the Elder's plans? Another outcast, a wizened female with milky eyes, spoke in a low voice. They have installed a dampener, a psychic field that suppresses our minds, that keeps us docile. It is strongest near the central chamber. Jeremy paused in his examination of the biomesh. A psychic dampener, what does it do? It keeps us from thinking clearly, Astra said. From organizing, from fighting back. It dulls our emotions, our very spirits. Jeremy's gaze turned contemplative. Is it possible to overload it? Astra's eyes widened. Perhaps, if we could gather enough mental energy, focus it, together. Jeremy stood, a spark of tenacity in his eyes. We're going to overload that dampener. We're going to disrupt their ritual, and we're going to save these people. He looked at the outcasts, his voice ringing with conviction. But we need your help, all of you. Suddenly, a staticky voice crackled from a comm device one of the outcasts held. Astra, are you there? Astra took the device, her expression hardening. Yes, what is it? They know, the voice said, strained with urgency. The Elders, they know you're here. They're sending enforcers. Many of them, but I can give you a bypass code. It will take you deeper into the Citadel, closer to the central chamber, but be warned. It's heavily guarded. Astra nodded grimly. Thank you, we won't forget this. The voice faded, leaving only static. Astra turned to Jeremy. We have to go. Now. The Enforcer, his face contorted with pain, pushed himself to his feet. I go with you, he said, his voice a guttural growl. I will have my revenge on those monsters. Jeremy hesitated. The Enforcer was in terrible condition, barely able to stand. You're in no shape to fight, he said gently. You need rest, medical attention. I need revenge, the Enforcer snarled. That is all that keeps me alive. Jeremy sighed. He couldn't leave the Enforcer behind, not in this place. All right, he said, but our priority is stopping that ritual, saving these people. Can you agree to that? The Enforcer nodded, his eyes burning with a fierce, unwavering hatred. Agreed. Astra entered the bypass code into a nearby access panel, and a section of the cavern wall slid open, revealing a narrow, dimly lit corridor. Jeremy led the way, his flashlight beam illuminating the path ahead. The corridor opened into a vast, circular chamber, the air humming with terrifying power. Intricate machinery lined the walls, pulsating with eerie green light. In the center of the chamber, a massive device dominated the space, its surface covered in glowing runes and complex circuitry. This was the heart of the Elder's energy siphoning technology. Jeremy approached the device cautiously, his fingers tracing the intricate patterns on its surface. Incredible, he murmured. The energy transfer is remarkably inefficient. There has to be a vulnerability here. He studied the schematics projected on a nearby console, his brow furrowed in concentration. Aha! He exclaimed, pointing to a specific section of the circuitry. A feedback loop. If we can disrupt this connection, we can overload the entire system. As they prepared to put Jeremy's plan into action, a deafening alarm blared through the chamber. Red lights flashed, and heavy plasteel doors slammed shut, sealing off the exits. We've been detected, Astra said, her voice tight with apprehension. Suddenly, a squad of enforcers burst into the chamber, their weapons raised and their eyes glowing with cold, unwavering dedication. Leading them was a tall, imposing figure in ornate armor, Astra's brother. Astra, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Stand aside. You are interfering with the Elder's will. Astra stepped forward, her face etched with anguish. Brother, she pleaded, you don't understand. The Elders are lying to you. They're using you. They're hurting innocent people. Her brother's expression remained impassive. "Silence," he said. "Your weakness has clouded your judgment. I will not allow you to betray our people." The enforcer, his body racked with pain, seized the opportunity. With a roar of defiance, he lunged at the commander, his cybernetic arm smashing into his chest. The chamber erupted in chaos. Energy weapons fired, ricocheting off the walls. Jeremy grabbed a discarded power cell and hurled it at an enforcer, knocking him off his feet. Astra used her agility to evade the energy blasts, her movements fluid and graceful. Jeremy fought with a desperate ferocity, his medical training giving him a surprising edge in close combat. He dodged and weaved, using his knowledge of anatomy to exploit the enforcer's weak points. Astra confronted her brother, trying to reason with him, to reach the man she once knew. But his mind was closed, his loyalty to the Elders absolute. Finally, after a brutal and exhausting battle, they managed to defeat the enforcers, leaving the commander wounded and bleeding on the floor. But the enforcer was weakened, his body pushed to its absolute limit. He collapsed, his breathing shallow and ragged, his eyes glazed with pain. Astra's voice cracked as she pleaded, "Brother, please, can't you see what they're doing? They're draining the life from our people." Kerr's face remained a mask of rigid loyalty. "Silence, Astra, you've been corrupted by this." "Human." He lunged, his hand raised to strike. A blur of motion intervened. The enforcer, his armor already scarred from previous encounters, stepped between them, intercepting Kerr's blow. A sickening crack echoed through the chamber. The enforcer staggered, his breathing ragged. "Go, save them." He rasped, his gaze fixed on Astra with a flicker of something akin to hope. Jeremy grabbed Astra's hand, pulling her forward. "We have to go now." They burst into the ritual chamber, a cavernous space filled with humming machinery and the sickly sweet scent of ozone. The Elders, their faces gaunt and lined, stood around a central dais where dozens of weak Arcturians were suspended, their bodies connected to a network of glowing tubes that pulsed with stolen energy. Their faces were slack, their eyes vacant. Jeremy's breath caught in his throat. It was a scene of unimaginable cruelty. He pushed aside his revulsion, focusing on the machinery. He circled the dais, his eyes scanning the intricate network of conduits and transformers. "There," he said, pointing to a junction point. "The energy transfer is inefficient. A small adjustment here. It could unleash a pulse, overload the system." Before he could act, a figure blocked their path. Kerr, his eyes blazing with fury, stood between them and the Elders. "You will not interfere." Astra stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "Brother, look at them. Are these the actions of just leaders? They are stealing life, not preserving it." Kerr's gaze flickered to the faces of the drained Arcturians. A flicker of doubt crossed his features, quickly suppressed by years of indoctrination. He hesitated, his hand hovering over his weapon. With a roar, the enforcer, battered but unbowed, slammed into Kerr, knocking him off balance. "Don't waste this chance," he bellowed, his voice strained. He locked Kerr in a desperate embrace, sacrificing himself to buy them precious seconds. Jeremy didn't hesitate. He reached for the junction point, his fingers tracing the complex circuitry. He remembered a similar system from his engineering classes, a lifetime ago. He muttered a prayer and with a swift, precise movement, altered the flow of energy. A high-pitched whine filled the chamber, escalating into a deafening roar. The conduits began to glow brighter, pulsating with unstable energy. The Elders cried out in alarm, their faces contorted with fear. The system overloaded. A massive pulse of energy erupted from the dais, throwing the Elders back against the walls. The tubes connecting the weak to the machine shattered, and they slumped forward, unconscious but alive. As the energy dissipated, the chamber was plunged into near darkness. Then slowly, the emergency lights flickered on, revealing a scene of devastation. But something else was revealed as well. Etched into the walls of the chamber, beneath layers of dust and grime, were ancient symbols and diagrams. "What is this?" Astra whispered, her voice filled with awe. Jeremy approached the wall, his fingers tracing the symbols. "This isn't just about prolonging their lives," he said, his voice grim. "They're suppressing something, something much bigger." He pieced together the diagrams, his eyes widening in understanding. Centuries ago, the elders caused an ecological disaster. This machine. It's not just draining life, it's masking the planet's wounds, wounds only the weak can heal. Astra gasped. Their empathy, their connection to the planet, it's the key. Jeremy nodded. But we need to amplify it. Astra reached into her pack, pulling out the device she had been working on in secret. It was a small, intricate piece of technology, cobbled together from human and Arcturian components. This is how we do it," she said, her eyes shining with persistence. "This will allow me to amplify the empathic field and heal the planet." Kerr, freed from the Enforcer's grasp, stared at the scene before him, his face a mask of confusion and horror. He looked at the drained bodies of the weak, then at the frantic efforts of Jeremy and Astra. The Enforcer's sacrifice echoed in his mind. Astra activated her device. A wave of energy pulsed outwards, washing over the chamber. The symbols on the wall began to glow, resonating with the energy of the device. The weak stirred, their eyes fluttering open. "Now, Jeremy," Astra cried. Jeremy focused on the junction point, pouring all his energy into stabilizing the system. Astra amplified his efforts, her empathic abilities creating a harmonious balance. The energy in the chamber began to stabilize, the chaotic pulses replaced by a steady, rhythmic flow. Kerr watched in disbelief as the weak began to stir, their faces regaining color. He saw the truth in their eyes, the truth the elders had tried so hard to suppress. I was wrong," he stammered, his voice filled with shame. "They lied to us all." As the other enforcers stormed into the chamber, Kerr stepped in front of Jeremy and Astra, shielding them from harm. "Stop," he commanded. "These two are trying to save us all." Chaos erupted as the enforcers turned on Kerr, their weapons raised. But Kerr stood firm, his eyes filled with newfound conviction. Seeing the shift in Kerr's allegiance, Jeremy knew the tide had turned. The news of the elders' deception spread like wildfire throughout the city. Arcturians, witnessing the restored health of the weak and the revelation of the ecological disaster, rose up in protest. The elders, their power stripped away, were deposed and imprisoned. A provisional government was formed, led by Arcturians who had long questioned the elders' philosophy. Astra's brother, driven by remorse and a desire to make amends, joined the council, vowing to undo the wrongs of the past. Jeremy and Astra worked tirelessly to heal the weak and integrate them into Arcturian society. They established new medical centers, adapted human technology to Arcturian needs, and educated the Arcturians on the value of compassion and inclusivity. One day, Astra turned to Jeremy, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You saved us, Jeremy. You saved our world." Jeremy smiled. "We saved it, Astra, together." He looked out at the city, now bustling with new life and hope. He thought of his oath, the oath he had almost broken. He knew then that he couldn't leave. "I'm staying," he said, his voice filled with conviction. There's still so much to do. And so, Jeremy remained on Arcturus, dedicating his life to helping the Arcturians build a more compassionate and just future. Astra's brother, now a respected member of the provisional government, worked alongside them, committed to undoing the wrongs of the past. The societal shift had begun. Arcturians were now embracing compassion, ingenuity, and empathy. The weak were no longer outcasts, but were now the saviors of the planet. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The Arcturians, with the help of a compassionate human, had learned a valuable lesson about the true meaning of strength and the enduring power of hope.